The Rune Smith. Chapter 101 Future Plans. There we go. Thud. Roland pushed the large log with the propeller connected to it into the hole like last time. This was the last wind turbine, which made it the third one that was now in his backyard. Bernier was close by to fill out the hole with rocks and this world's version of cement. I think this puts us a bit in the red this month. With his expansion continuing through the months that Bernier was hired, Roland was slowly burning through his money. Due to the nature of these wind generators, he wanted to make them with the best materials he could afford. The lumber they were made from was also quite special. The fantasy wood was very resistant and would be unaffected by the elements. There were also metallic parts inside which were mostly composed of deep steel, which also had various appealing properties. The magical alchemistic materials that the copper wires were coated in also weren't cheap. They would also need to connect them to the four corners of the fence with the runic structures that delivered electrical shocks to any unforeseen guests. Now even more after he made a public appearance in the city and beat up some thugs. Should not be a problem after we receive the money from the auction house. Yeah, wish they would lower the margins though. Roland was a bit maddened by the high transaction fee that this particular auction house was giving him. There was only one of them in this city, and they even increased the margins after finally expanding in size. This was also one of the reasons a black market started to appear. Bernier mentioned some rumors which they couldn't confirm, but it was quite natural for it to spring up. The information also carried something else: if a black market was being made, then the Thieves' Guild wouldn't be far behind. The city was finally becoming something to be desired, which would bring the criminal element over. I did spend a lot on that item. The prices here are ridiculous. The biggest reason they were close to being bankrupt was the toy that he bought. While waiting for the guild to respond to his complaint, they had spotted an old runic golem toy. It was about 30 centimeters in height and made from rock, but it was somewhat functional. Its design left a lot to be desired. From what he could tell, it was supposed to look like a turtle, but the craftsmanship wasn't that great. The thing looked like a big jagged rock with 4 legs attached to it and a little head with stones for eyes. The uses were also limited, but it could very slowly react to some basic spoken commands. Agni didn't seem to like it that much. I think he thought it was another pet. An image from the previous day popped into Roland's head of the time Agni saw the turtle walking through the backyard. The little wolf pup actually tried attacking it after a few sniffs. Luckily Roland managed to peel him off the rock turtle without much damage happening. Now with a basic golem in his possession, he would be able to work on that automated operating system. Regretfully, it proved to be quite convoluted and with a lot of lines of code. It would probably take him weeks or maybe months to get through it fully before being able to add his own flair. The small puppy was still in his unevolved state as Roland was keeping it from progressing. The skill related to mana stones was close to maxing out now, so the joyous occasion would probably be happening within this month's time. Okay, let's wait for this to set. This should be enough energy to run the whole workshop for now. Since Bernier's accident, he was allowed down into Roland's workshop. All of the runic tools were down there, which his assistant was now allowed to use. They would remain down there for now while the dummy workshop was still used for disguise purposes. Due to this, he decided to let Bernier expand the log shack to the side. If any thieves came around, he would at least not be inside the workshop during the robbery. He was even planning to connect the two parts with a tunnel and put in a runic thumbprint of sorts. With more gear at larger items came the need for expansion. He was going to be working on a prototype golem design that would need more space. The first one would be small and portable, but later on, Roland did want to make it at least human-sized. A group of golems patrolling the premises would probably keep most people away, but also paint a bullseye on his house. Only people having things worth protecting would spend so much money and time on costly defenses. It would be clear to anyone outside that there was money to be made by performing a little robbery. "Excuse me, I have a letter to a Mr. Wayland." While the two blacksmiths were about to get something to eat, a voice of a young boy was heard from behind the gate. Roland expected this letter to arrive at about this time. "Please leave your signature here." After showing the courier his adventurer card and signing his name, he was delivered a letter. On it was the date of the guild hearing that he signed up to. Roland wasn't wearing his armor anymore, the cat was out of the bag, so there was no reason to hide. Soon the boy left and Bernier peeked at the letter. What's the date? In 3 days, you better wash up and put on some good clothes, the guild master might be there. Roland chuckled while reading through the contents of the letter. Besides the date, there was also the location, which was of course at the guild. He was to show up there with any evidence that could confirm his case. It took close to a week for this date to be set up. The people from the guild had shown up at his doorstep a few days ago. They had questioned him and Bernier about the day, and Roland had even taken them to the spot where his assistant was brutally assaulted. After getting more information they had left, but beforehand they had asked him if he really wanted to continue with the process. He knew that there were ways of clearing this up on the down low, but that wasn't his aim. Roland didn't want any money or guild benefits, he just wanted unqualified people like Armand to be punished for their unprofessional behavior. If the guild master would actually punish him remained to be seen. Nevertheless, he at least wanted to judge his character. By knowing the guild master's thought process, he would know how to act around him. There were a couple of ways this could go. It was possible that he would just dismiss the whole thing and do nothing. Armand would remain as an instructor and test other recruits as previously. Nothing would change and no one would be punished either. This was more of a neutral option, but the worst would be if Roland got punished instead. Armand was throwing his weight around as if he wasn't afraid of any repercussions. If the guild master revealed himself to be his uncle or the sort, then Roland could be in a heap of trouble. Then was the option of it going his way. Armand would be removed from his position, maybe even fined. Taking away the thugs' guild cards would also be a nice bonus to this whole predicament. In Roland's opinion, they should serve jail time for acting like common thugs and also making the guild look bad in the process. But he carried out some vigilante justice himself, so he might also suffer. Can't I wear my regular clothes? Bernier replied while Roland was going through the possible outcomes. His half-dwarven friend had a certain lack of items. Clean clothes were one of them. The two men living here together were a little out of their element when it came to fashion and keeping things clean. I think you need to go buy a new shirt and new pants. Roland glanced at the various stains on Bernier's clothes. There were also burn marks from some blacksmithing. Those sparks and embers sometimes did make it past the blacksmith's apron. Maybe I should get someone to come to clean the house each week. He wasn't really that keen on mopping the floors and sweeping them. Bernier also had to work on his blacksmithing class, so they minimized house cleaning and cooking. Hey boss, have you ever thought about opening up a shop here? I bet you could sell some of those swords for more than at the auction house. Some of those merchants would pay double for a custom-made sword. Bernier was quick to change the subject of the guild visit. After spending some time crafting blacksmithing tools, he had grown a need of sharing them. There was a particular need in each craftsman to show off their wares, and it was the same for these two. Even Roland liked his previous arrangement back in Edelgard. His name was known and people enjoyed his scrolls, but here he was still someone without a well-known brand. A shop? Hey, I might need to at least hire a clerk, best if it's a woman. Roland knew that it was always best to have a good-looking salesperson at the forefront of your store. Many of the high-class stores used elven women for this very purpose, as they were universally acclaimed beauties by almost all the other races. Bernier, on the other hand, wasn't that good to look at, but he would probably be good at explaining the items in detail. A woman? I could ask some of the girls from the pub. I bet all of them would sell their knickers to get out of working there. For some reason, his assistant started drooling while imagining things, probably ones involving bar wenches and him being their boss in the new store. First, Roland would have to get things in order here before allowing more people to waltz in. Bernier was fine, but bringing more people brought in more trouble. He would have to come up with some good contracts to keep company secrets. He would also need a name for his company. Wayland Industries. Maybe something not involving my fake name. I'm sure you'd love to give them job interviews. You know me well, boss. Before that, you can go get yourself some clean pants and a shirt. Roland tossed some coins towards Bernier as he was serious about the half-dwarf's wardrobe. He at least had to make him look presentable to the adventurers. If you look more professional, then people would take you more seriously. Okay, boss. Just ask some of those wench friends of yours for a fitting shirt, nothing too fancy. Bernier's and Roland didn't really have a knack for fashion. Both of them would rather create metal armor or other lighter gear to wear instead of formal clothes. Fancy dresses were more in line with nobles, but merchants and high rollers were also using them. What are you going to wear, boss? Me? Just the usual, but without the helmet this time around. He was already known for being a weirdo that used shiny runic armor and wore it everywhere. There was no use of him getting a tunic to this occasion. The armor would also give him some protection in the case of something going wrong. Without it, he was nothing more than a failed mage and a somewhat competent warrior. If Armand attacked him when he wasn't wearing it, and if he didn't have any of his items, the fight would surely go in his favor after a couple of exchanges. This was his biggest weakness, as he heavily relied on his runic items for battle. The only thing he could do was try to minimize them for such an occasion so that he could at least have something to use when in trouble. There was also another theory he was working on, which involved scribing the runes on his own body. Unfortunately, there was a big problem with the deterioration. The mana would already eat through leather scrolls and burn them up. It would do the same to his skin. He might be able to produce one effect at the cost of his limbs and while giving himself third-degree burns. At this point in time, it would be better to get the thinnest sheet of magic paper and just tape it to his body. At least he would have a one-time use item that wouldn't cause him to pass out. Roland could actually think that putting some adhesive to one side of the scroll and then placing it on his body wasn't such a bad idea. Thanks to the direct contact with his skin, he would be able to set it off at any time he wanted. It would probably be a valid way for a surprise attack after someone destroyed his armor. You sure love that armor, don't ya? If only I had more mana. Bernier started sulking as he knew that if he asked, Roland would create some runic equipment for him. Being a carpenter and a regular blacksmith, his stats weren't all that great. He wasn't suited for prolonged magical item use and would probably pass out quite fast if he ever tried to use Roland's crimson armor. There were some ways of making mana boosting gear. Most of them used special alloys that could actually absorb ambient mana from the surroundings. Then, along with the mana stones, they would lower the casting requirements exponentially. They all had a large price attached to them, which was several times higher than deep steel he was using. This metal was only resistant to runic deterioration but didn't add any other bonuses besides that. Yes, unless you find me a crate filled with blue mithril, you can forget about it. Now, stop stalling, go get yourself that fancy shirt, and don't come back until you have it. Time continued to pass, and in a few days, it was finally time to get the hearing over with. Roland and Bernier appeared at the guild together. The half-dwarven assistant had bought a nice-looking white shirt along with some dark pants. It fit on him well, and thankfully he was young, so his belly wasn't protruding that much compared to all the regular dwarves. Remember, just answer the questions truthfully. If we're lucky, this shouldn't take more than an hour. Okay, boss. Roland also forced Bernier to get a haircut and somehow control that scruffy beard of his. He knew that looking professional during a hearing like this could move things in his way. The two craftsmen entered through the main entrance without really turning any heads. At this point in time, Roland wasn't seen as anything out of the ordinary and was already known as Wayland the runesmith. They needed to wait for a second, but in time the glasses-wearing receptionist herself walked up to them. "Mr. Wayland, please follow me." Roland nodded as he and Bernier were led further into the building. This was one of the larger buildings in the city with many side rooms. Inside were various facilities that the guild used to make money, but today they would be going into a middle-sized room. I wonder what they will decide on. He didn't have a good opinion of this guild, so Roland wasn't expecting much today. He at least hoped that some justice would be done today. With mixed feelings, he pushed the door open to where the hearing would take place. Inside were already people waiting for them, some known while others ones that he never saw before. It was time to get this over with. Chapter 102 Orphans. Hey Elydia, did something happen? Armand asked while dropping onto a chair. The wood started squeaking due to the man's increased weight but somehow survived his large frame. It was already past sundown and most of the young kids were fast asleep. The few candles that were lighting up this place made it hard to see, but this was all that they could afford for now. Yes, could you explain this? Elydia, who was a worker at the Adventurers Guild, placed down a piece of paper on the nearby table. It looked like one of the many forms that could be found at the Adventurers Guild. Armand looked at the piece of paper from the corner of his eye, not really knowing what this was about. What is this? Read it. Elydia waited while tapping her foot on the wooden floor. Armand raised a brow for a moment but finally leaned over to grab the piece of paper. He was nervous that they were having this talk as he thought that Lobelia had snitched on him. After catching up to the half-elven girl, he had managed to convince her to not tell anyone about what had happened that day. This required a little bribe, but it would keep him from having to explain it to Elydia here. He started going through this piece of paper, and the more he read the more his forehead went up. This was a copy of the form that Roland had filled out. Elydia knew that this was against the guild rules, but she would bend those slightly for one of her own. That bastard! Where is he? I'm going to... Armand ripped through the piece of paper in a fit of rage. On the form that Roland filled out was a detailed recount of what had happened that day. It listed the name of the party that attacked Bernier and the people involved. Roland had asked his assistant about it and filled everything in. There was also a recount of Armand's involvement. How he ignored Roland's advice and didn't want to go to the guild to clear everything up. Roland had specifically written that he had asked Armand many times to stop fighting and go resolve it with the guild, but was ignored instead. He also mentioned that the whole fight endangered the citizens in the city and that Armand was not fit to work for the guild. There were also some demands in there. One was for Armand to be fired from the guild and put on probation. A probation period could be put on a guild member for various reasons. It would cause them to not be able to use some of the facilities and also get less money for their work. This was mostly done to punish people that didn't perform their missions on time or failed them multiple times in a row. Sit down. Elydia raised her voice at Armand that jumped up to his feet. The ruckus even brought the half-elven girl over that was already listening in from the other side. She was there when her big sister called Armand over and she was afraid that he was in for a scolding. Hey you two, why don't we calm down? Armand, if you raise your voice this much you'll wake up the little ones, you big doofus. Lobelia whispered after closing the door behind herself. Lobelia, you know something about this, explain yourself. Elydia knew that the young half-elf girl was hiding something from her as Armand, and she was acting strange ever since a few days ago. Even now she was convinced that they were hiding some facts. Finally, after some glares from their big sister, Armand and Lobelia opened up. They recounted the story from their point of view. Armand wanted to paint himself as a noble warrior that just wanted to help some friends from the guild. Roland, on the other hand, was described as a mustache-twirling villain that just beat up everyone that looked at him. You are friends with that Devon? Elydia recalled hearing that name. There were some previous complaints against that man and his party. They seemed to have been extorting Tier 1 adventurers, but whenever someone reported something they soon took that claim back. It was rumored that Devon and his thugs were threatening them, but without evidence or any witnesses, the guild couldn't punish them. I told you not to associate with people like those. And what were you doing in that district to begin with? The angry woman glared at both Armand and Lobelia that felt attacked. She only used one of her tracking skills to search for her idiot party member. Now she was also being questioned about her wandering close to the red light district of the city. I didn't do anything wrong, it's all that guy's fault. The guild might not see it your way. Armand was quickly corrected. How would they? I'm sure the old man will see it my way. Elydia gave out a sigh after hearing Armand still not admitting that he was in the wrong in any shape or form. She thought back to a time long past where she had to take care of this idiot brother of hers. This was an orphanage that she helped set up in the city. The three of them also came from one of them. Everyone decided to move here when the new dungeon became known. She was forced to transfer here by the guild, and these two followed after. With time they bought out one of the larger houses to help the children with no parents. Stop calling the guild master like that. This time around he might not be able to help you or could choose not to. What do you mean? Armand asked while trying to talk quietly. Elydia gave out a sigh while gathering the pieces of paper that were previously a copy of Roland's form. It doesn't matter, can't you just go to this Wayland and apologize? He seemed like a reasonable person, he might take back his complaint. She knew that Armand was throwing his weight around lately, even more since he was close to the 100th level. His pugilist class would be maxed out at L50 and then he would be able to select a more prestigious one. The praises from stronger adventurers and the guild master only made him more arrogant. She knew that the guild leader might see this as a chance to take him down a peg. Me apologize? Never. I would never apologize to a coward like that. Coward? Elydia asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, we could have resolved it like men, but instead he went and done this. Like men? She asked once more while progressively sounding colder. A vein on her forehead started to appear while she grasped a book from the side. With a one-on-one fight, of course. Armand struck a battle pose but soon was hit with a large book straight to the face. Didn't you already lose a one-on-one fight to him before? What would have happened if Lobelia didn't arrive on time? The glasses-wearing woman alluded to the second fight that Roland and Armand had. If the half-elf didn't arrive, it looked like Armand would have lost the fight as his skill was taking a toll on him. You even asked her for help, who is acting like a coward now? A barrage of books and pottery descended on Armand's face as Elydia started shouting at Armand's flawed logic. It was obvious that he had a thick head, and unless someone beat him down hard enough he wouldn't give an inch. Hey, stop, the fight never finished, so I never lost. Armand shielded himself with his large hands while slowly evacuating from this room. From his perspective, the fight never reached a conclusion. In his experience, there was always a chance for a reversal during combat. One lucky punch was all that he needed to win the fight. Even though his skill deflated him quite a bit, he did have another trump card waiting. He was confident that if he timed it well he would be the one standing victorious. Stop being a child and go apologize. Never. The conversation ended with Armand escaping through the door and quickly running out of the room. Some of the older kids were laughing at him, pointing fingers as the large man escaped outside. Get back here this instant. I think we won't see him back tonight. You know how stubborn he gets. Do you really think he might lose his position in the guild? While holding a wooden plate up that she wanted to toss at the escaping Armand, Elydia gave out another sigh. It's a possibility, I don't know if that person will let it end unless that idiot gets punished in some way. The guild master is also interested in him. Elydia was part of the guild and stayed informed. She knew of the person named Wayland the Rune Smith. He was low-key, but ever since the advancement test he was getting inspected by the guild information section. There was even a file on him that was slowly being filled out due to the guild master's interest in him. But if he loses his position, then we will also lose all of our good selling rates. Staff members of the guild always got a better deal while selling things like mana stones and monster parts. They also could buy things like health potions at a lower price while just having to do some side work. Armand didn't actually need to work that much. He was mostly used to perform tests on new Tier 2 adventurers just like he did with Roland. Then sometimes he would be asked to perform certain quests by the guild that he couldn't refuse. Those could range from fetch quests to escort missions to other cities. People like him were given the position to act as a more trusted and elite force that the guild could use. They mostly went to work when a high-paying client showed up and the guild wanted to be sure that the request would go through. They didn't want random adventurers making them look bad in front of influential people. Thus they would hire promising prospects to perform these tasks. I know this month might be tight. Lobelia frowned at the prospect of losing Armand's premium rates. She was part of his party, so she would also be affected. Part of her income went to this place as well. They would be losing about 10% of their monthly wages if this happened. This apparently for the reason that their big brother wasn't able to halt his violent ways. Where does this Wayland live? I'll go and ask him to drop the complaint. That wouldn't be a good idea, just help me clean this place. There were scattered books and other items around this room after Elydia unleashed some pent-up rage on her younger brother. None of the people here were related by blood, but everyone was treated as part of the family. But big sis, what if I can convince him otherwise? No man can resist my charms. The elven girl puffed out her chest as if trying to show off her assets. The big sister just glanced at this chest and gave it a pat. Maybe first try growing something here before you try charming anyone. Lobelia's pose quickly changed as she slumped forward, her hands covering her chest, which was on the smaller side. I'm still growing. It might actually be better if we don't convince that man to take back the complaint, said Elydia while Lobelia looked confused. How would that be better? We will lose money. That we will, but maybe that idiot might learn something from this. Lobelia looked to her big sister and after thinking for a moment she nodded. Her older brother's behavior had been deteriorating ever since the guild master became interested in him. She knew that he had gone through a rough childhood. Most of his problems were always resolved thanks to his fists. He needs to understand that not all of his problems can be resolved with fists alone. Both of them nodded at each other and agreed not to go see Wayland. They hoped that this would teach Armand some humility, but that was only if the guild favored Wayland's claim. They were still part of his family though and didn't wish for any bad outcomes. Elydia wished that Armand would see the error of his ways but still didn't want him to get banned from the guild, which was a possibility. The two continued to clean and finally, the day of the hearing was upon them. Armand, being his stubborn self, never returned to the orphanage directly and talked through Lobelia while evading his older sister. Haven't had one of these in a while and it's against Armand and some tier 2 adventurers. An old man asked while looking over some papers. Roland would recognize this person as the man that helped him with Agni. Yes, Mr. Wilser. And it's that young man that is making the complaint. Yes, Mr. Wayland. The small gnome rubbed his chin while thinking back to the armored man that he taught some basics about monster taming. The hearing will be starting in 10 minutes, Mr. Wayland is already here and waiting. Elydia was talking while looking into the distance. She could see Roland in his usual red armor, but this time around his helmet was to the side. What she saw was quite the handsome young man with a strong jawline. He looked to be someone that wasn't even in his 20s, but she knew that looks could be deceiving and he could be much older. Well, at least he took off that silly helmet this time around. The gnome scoffed a bit while looking over the papers. Let us get this over with, there is much work to be done today. Elydia nodded while the old man walked away and into the room where the hearing would be taking place. Soon after, Armand finally appeared at the scene along with the guild master. Even though Armand was already a large man, the guild master dwarfed him by quite a bit. He was from a race that was considered small giants, known for their physical strength and warrior classes. Our little Armand has gotten himself into trouble, isn't that right, Elydia? The guild master appeared with a big smile on his face. It was clear that he wasn't taking this very seriously, but Armand that was next to him wasn't smiling. Who are you calling little? Why are we even here, old man? You can just dismiss this. It seemed that her younger brother was still adamant in his beliefs. Luckily, even though the guild master was finding this whole predicament hilarious, he was still carrying out his duties. I don't know. Should I? Elydia stood there while hugging some papers against her chest. She still could not come to terms with how Armand acted around the guild master. The large man had somehow grown to like this small brother of hers and even helped him train. Though it was always a one-sided beatdown where Armand ended up defeated. Yes, you should, or just let me fight him one-on-one. Ho ho, so you almost losing to him twice wasn't enough. I never lost to him. That's not what little Elydia here reported to me. The old man laughed while giving her a little wink. She didn't react in any way, just continued to stare at the two idiots with scorn. That's only because of that armor if he fought me fairly. Fairly, hey. The smile that the old large male had plastered all over his face finally faded. He turned to Armand that was trying to explain himself, but before he could, a large fist descended onto his head. He was quickly pressed to the ground due to the guild master's hit, almost getting hit out cold. If you think that the armor is the only reason that you lost, then you still have a lot to learn, boy. Now stop whining like a wench and get in there. The guild master grabbed Armand by the neck and yanked him into the room where the hearing would be taking place. Elydia, tell them to get a move on, we don't have all day. Soon she walked over to the side of the accusers and guided them inside this room. In it, besides the guild master and old gnome, there were 2 other guild members. The only side that was missing was the party of 5 thugs that attacked Bernier. Mr. Wayland and Mr. Bernier, please take a seat, we will start the hearing soon. Elydia said while greeting Roland. It was finally time to get this hearing started. Chapter 103 The Hearing. Roland walked in through the room while wearing his red armor. This time around though, he had his helmet down. This was an official hearing with even the guild master present. There was no use hiding his face, he would need to take it off anyway if they started asking questions. The room was about the size of a school classroom with a large desk with the guild workers sitting at it. He could see the woman with the glasses sitting to the side along with the gnome that explained taming-related skills to him. In the middle of the table he saw an unknown giant. It was clear from the first glance that he was someone belonging to the Goliath race. He was large and muscular and looked to be the one running the show here. Roland hadn't seen the guild master before, but he knew from the rumors about his characteristics. Why would the guild master be here? This was the first red flag. Normally there would be a higher ranking worker from the guild present here, but not the guild master. Could this be why Armand was not afraid to attack other adventurers? Could he be backed by the guild master? If so, Roland could be the one getting banned from the guild instead. There were another 2 people sitting to the other side. It was an older woman and a middle-aged man. The man looked like a fighting instructor, his face was filled with scars and his body was also rather muscular. He was clearly someone belonging to the warrior profession. Next to him was an older woman in a robe, she gave him mage vibes. By the way, Mana gathered around her. She was someone with a large amount just like Roland here. 5 people in total were behind that table. From what Roland could tell, these people would take a vote. You needed 3 votes in your favor to have the verdict go your way. There was also the guild master present though, he could outright shift the whole thing in Armand's favor. Roland feared that if he gave an order the others would not vote against his judgment. There was a set of 2 long tables on the opposite side. In one of them, he noticed a familiar face. It was the muscle-bound Armand, who looked quite angry. He was staring daggers at the guild master for some reason. When Roland walked in, his target had changed. This was the first time they were actually face to face. It seemed that the fist fighter was a bit surprised at how young Roland was. Even though his frame was similar to an adult man, he was still only about 16 years old. The only person that actually saw his face before was the elven receptionist lady. She wasn't here though, so it was a first for everyone gathered. While being stared at, the woman with the glasses walked up to him. Mr. Wayland, Mr. Bernier. Please take a seat. She pointed to the 2 chairs that were probably prepared for him and Bernier. They were at the table that was to the left of the one Armand was sitting at. The 2 nodded and slowly walked over to their seats. Roland purposely evaded Armand's menacing stare, which only caused the muscle idiot to get angrier. Those 5 idiots aren't there. Might have actually skipped town. For now, it looked like they were missing the party of the Tier 2 thugs that attacked Bernier. Not being here would actually work against them. They wouldn't be able to explain themselves, so Roland winning the case was almost guaranteed. The only one he would need to watch for is Armand then. It would seem that Mr. Devon and his party haven't arrived yet. Ms. Elydia, would you know anything about this? The one that spoke up was the old mage-looking granny. The old woman had a gentle smile on her face while looking at the receptionist lady and asking the question. One of our guild members should be bringing them over soon. She answered while the warrior-looking man next to the old woman grinned a bit. You mean Korguk? Hope he doesn't kill them before they get here, though that might speed things up. The man rubbed his chin while looking happy for some reason. He was probably imagining a violent ending for the party of 5 by the hands of this associate of theirs. Let us wait, if it's Korguk then he should get them here. The guild master waved his hand while leaning back in his chair. Roland took this time to examine this man. This was apparently the most powerful adventurer in the city. A tier 3 class holder that followed the warrior tree. If someone wanted to become a true guild master, this was the main requirement. You had to have successfully attained a tier 3 class. This was a new city and a new guild, which made Roland believe that he was probably at the lower end of this tier 3 class. Albrook was a developing city and no established guild master would take the time to spend years developing it. Most of the time something like this would be given to new guild masters. Roland wasn't sure about this man's character, but he didn't seem like someone that enjoyed guild politics. He was sitting with his back leaned back and legs spread apart like he owned the place, which he did. He looked like the type that would settle things with his fists instead of diplomacy. Hope he won't think of something idiotic like having us both fight to clear things out. The victor gets the spoils. Something as silly as that would probably not come to place, as there were strict rules. The guild master would be breaking guild laws if he ordered such a verdict. On the other hand, Roland wasn't sure what he could do if such a decision was made. Not like he had anyone that he could file a complaint to. The only one that outranked this man would be another guild master from a larger guild. There were many guilds spread throughout the lands. It worked similar to a chain of stores with the guild masters being managers in them. Then there was someone like a regional manager that the guild masters had to answer to. Above them finally was the strongest one out of them, a tier 5 monster. This was also mostly where the journey of power ended for everyone. There weren't many people that could achieve something of that height in their lives. The experience it took was massive. Besides that, most people ended up retiring after achieving tier 3, which was already seen as being one of the top elites. I'd have to go to one of those regional guild masters, hey. While thinking, his eyes met with the imposing-looking man. The man that looked to be chiseled out of granite smirked, which made Roland flinch a bit. It looked like he was about to say something, but before he could, the door slammed open and one of the thugs that attacked Bernier flew through it. Ah, finally. What took you so long, Korguk? Soon all 4 of them were in the room. Behind them was an imposing half-orc that looked quite similar to the one that he met as a slave. His face and bone structure were quite similar. The main difference was that his shade of green was paler. Korguk bring, now Korguk go. The way that he talked was also akin to what he remembered from Galgrim. He was quick to remove himself from the room after shoving the 5 adventurers in. They all had bruises on their bodies and it was clear that they didn't come here of their own volition. Good, everyone is here, let us get this over with. The guild master leaned forward while smacking the table with his large hand. Elydia instructed the 5 to sit at the table with Armand. The 5, after realizing that the guild master was here along with some other powerful adventurers, were quick to shrink back. Like puppies with curled up tails, they waddled over to their seats as the hearing finally commenced. We have gathered here due to Mr. Wayland's complaint about the party name, Dread End. Elydia started listing the names of everyone. Devon and his gang had quite the showy name, but not much to show for it. They were only lower-level tier 2 adventurers with basic classes that didn't show much promise for the future. Dread End was seen being attacked by Mr. Wayland in the focus was on the battle at the pub. It seemed that the guild did their research. Elydia explained that Roland was seen walking up to them slowly and that he asked for the backpack more than once before attacking. Devon and his boys were the first ones to draw the weapons, which put Roland in an advantageous position. Does anyone from Dread End have anything to add? Of course we do. That madman clearly attacked us, we were just defending ourselves. That's right. The ones that were being accused were unwilling to admit to their robbery. The problem with this was that it came to their word against his and Bernier's. The only thing that could help them were the witnesses. This was a bit concerning as he had no idea who the guild would bring in or if they even took the time to do this. This was also why he was soon pleasantly surprised as they brought out the first witness, a middle-aged dwarf. "Could you point out who Mr. Devon and his party members were following?" "Yes, it was him, I saw it with my very own eyes." "He lies." "Damn dwarf, I'm going to pipe down." A little scene unfolded that Roland didn't predict. The guild brought out this witness from somewhere and apparently he saw Devon and his buddies following after Bernier. He described how he noticed them walking out of an alley and trailing after his assistant in detail. How they managed to find this guy was unknown to him, but someone did a good job. Dreadend was not happy about this surprise witness, but they quickly quieted down after the man next to the guild master shouted at them. It was clear that they knew him and were scared. The hearing continued and it was going in Roland's and Bernier's favor. Some people from the pub were questioned and they also mentioned how he left money behind after trashing the wall. "I think I've heard enough. Dreadend will be suspended from the guild, we can't have our adventurers acting like common thugs." The guild master spoke out while the others nodded. These 5 made them look quite bad, and even though they were tier 2 class holders they could be replaced. "I agree with the guild master, but this isn't enough. I say we give them to the city guards, they did almost kill a man." The one that brought this up was the old gnome. The others murmured for a moment before starting a vote between themselves. Everyone minus the man with scars on his face was for this idea, his reasoning being that he didn't like the nobles being involved in guild politics. "The city guards? You think we'll take this lying down?" Devon and his buddies quickly shot up to their feet before storming for the exit. They were already forced to arrive here due to the half-orc and were probably planning to escape from the beginning. Roland watched them tackle the large door that was locked. It couldn't take a full shoulder tackle from a tier 2 tank and broke down instantly. He wasn't about to chase after them, though this was the Adventurers Guild and they had enough people to handle something like this. Dreadend reached a bad ending as they didn't make it outside. The half-orc was still there on guard along with other instructors. After a little scuffle, the 5 thugs were apprehended. "Well, I guess you didn't get a chance to say much, Bernier." Bernier was to the side wiping some sweat from his brow. Roland could see him flinch a bit as the people that broke his leg stormed out in haste. He wasn't even able to testify as the surprise witnesses took care of that for him. I just want to go back to the workshop and drink some wine, hope they get sent to the mines." Bernier laughed weakly. Sending people to mine underground was a popular punishment for criminals. People like that would be mostly branded as criminal slaves and used for hard labor. In this world, there were no large prisons where the prisoners just stayed in without working like in Roland's previous world. Everyone was forced to work for their food, and if they didn't, then death was the only way out. "You might want to hold that thought, this isn't over yet," Roland commented while looking at the one person that was sitting at the other table. Armand started out looking angry, but now he just looked bored. The young man had even dozed off during the questioning of the previous witnesses as if it didn't concern him. After a few minutes, another member from the guild popped his head through the door. "We got them, guild master." "Haha, good. Keep them locked up till the guards arrive, then they will be their problem." It seemed that the guild master was finding these scenes quite amusing. Roland already noticed that this man acted quite relaxed and as if he didn't take many things all too seriously. If this was a good or bad thing he wasn't quite sure. "So are we done here?" the man with the scars asked while standing up. "What about little Armand there?" the old woman next to him commented while causing Armand to look at her with a frown. "What about him?" "We got the ones responsible. Everyone can agree that it was just a misunderstanding between the adventurers. They can just shake on it like men." Roland remained seated while he listened. Half of his requirements had been fulfilled by the apprehension of the band of thugs. They were even going to go to jail, but if they got prosecuted and sentenced would remain to be seen. "Shake on it." Roland finally raised his voice while the guild members looked at him. "Why would you allow someone like that to still work here?" he said while pointing to the man he was accusing. "Someone like that?" Armand called out from the side while looking at Roland with scorn. It was clear that he had not learned his lesson yet. "How would you wish to resolve this issue then, young man?" The one that asked was the old mage-looking lady. "I'm not sure how the guild conducts itself, but I think someone that can't think before acting is unfit to be an instructor. He makes the whole guild look bad." Roland's main issue with Armand was that he was a blockhead that only wanted to solve his problems with fists. It would be fine if he was a regular adventurer, but he was part of a larger unit. He made the whole guild seem like a band of thugs, not much better than the people that they just sentenced. "Hear that? You are making us look bad." The guild master gave out a chuckle while looking at the angered Armand. "See, even now that idiot wants nothing more than to attack me again, just like he did before without thinking. Do you really want someone like that around?" The issue with Armand attacking him after he cleared out Dread End was already known. Now he only needed to convince these people to see it his way. The best way to do this in his eyes was to make them feel like he made their organization look bad. People could start going to other businesses to sell their monster parts if the guild started being known for their unreasonable practices. "I had enough of this nonsense, just have the two fight and clear this out as men," the man with the scars proposed while most of the people that were sitting with him sighed. "That's why they think we are all muscle brains," the old woman commented while shaking her head. "Yes, let us fight." Armand looked pumped for this option, though why Roland wasn't sure. He had already shown that he was more than able to beat this man in a one-on-one fight. "Haven't you already lost to him twice? Sit down, you idiot," the guild master commented while slamming his hand on the table, which caused the other people to quiet down. "That's only because of that armor. Be quiet, idiot." "Hey you there, kid," the guild master called out to Roland while shouting at Armand. "Did you make that armor yourself?" he asked while Roland just nodded, not like he was hiding that he was a runesmith at this point in time. "Interesting. Hey, doesn't the guild lack runesmiths? Why don't we sign a contract with this kid?" "Contract?" Roland's eyes narrowed, not sure what this man was trying to do. "We'll lower the rates of what the auction house is giving you." "Better the rates?" Roland had to take a moment to think. Getting more money was always nice. The auction house was kind of scalping the prices as there was no one going up against them. The guild was an entity that could compete with them, and some did expand to have their own stores that sold more than just healing potions. "Shouldn't we end this hearing first? We don't have all day," the old gnome called out from the side as they did not reach a verdict yet. "Right, the vote. All for firing little Armand here raise their hands." Chapter 104 A New Business Venture? 2 hands were raised for and 2 against Armand being relieved of his position as an instructor. The ones that were against it was the man with the scars on his face, which didn't come as a surprise to Roland. The man was a similar type of person as Armand, and he wanted to settle it with a fist fight instead. The other person that was against it came as a surprise, as the woman with the glasses that was a receptionist raised it. He could somewhat tell that she hesitantly raised that hand for some reason. Was this Armand guy blackmailing her, or did they have some history? The old lady and gnome that were clearly people that worked more with their brains were for it though. It all came down to the guild master now. Would he choose to fire Armand or would he keep him here? The impression Roland had through the interactions here was that they two were close. It was as if the guild master was an older brother that liked to make fun of their younger sibling. He would constantly laugh at his anger outbreaks while pointing his finger, but not like Roland could do much about it. The real perpetrators were banned from the guild, so this was already a win for him. 2 against 2? Maybe little Elidia shouldn't have been assigned to this hearing, the man commented while rubbing his chin, his bald head shining in the room light. This comment only strengthened Roland in his beliefs that the woman was involved with Armand in one way or another. The woman in question just turned her face to the side while evading the gaze of the other people in the room. "You put this old man in a tough position. He shrugged a bit while standing up. After a few steps he was in front of Armand that continued to be in a foul mood. The large bald man from the Goliath race smiled brightly while the recipient looked even more dejected. "Don't worry Armand, you can keep your adventurer card. Here it comes." Roland wanted to give out a sigh as it seemed that this rowdy adventurer would be getting out of this without losing his position. "I knew I could count on you, old man." Armand rejoiced and wanted to stand up while grinning in Roland's direction. Before he could go through with that, a large hand was placed on his shoulder and kept him in place. "I'm not finished yet, brat." The man's voice got colder and the aura around him also changed. "You can keep it, but it will need to be updated as your position as an instructor will become vacant." "Old man, what are you? It seems like I've been too lax on you. Ever since you got here you have been picking fights with everyone that was up for it. Then when someone comes along that can contend with you, you do nothing but complain like a little brat." Soon Roland could see the guildmaster grabbing Armand's other shoulder and slowly lifting him up into the air. With both his mid-sized palms clenching together, even Armand with his large frame looked like a small child in comparison. "I gave you too much freedom. And what do you do with it? Attack a runesmith in my city? Do you want our guild to go bankrupt or something?" The conversation soon shifted into something that Roland didn't expect. It started to sound like the guildmaster was more concerned about offending a runesmith than about what Armand was actually doing. "He is a human rumsmith of all things. Do you know how rare those are? Do you realize how hard it is to find a runesmith that isn't forced into the Dwarven Union?" "Hey? Do you? Dwarven Union?" Roland knew this name. It was a huge behemoth of united dwarven companies. At one point all of the dwarven craftsmen gathered under a large banner to hike up the prices of the magical items. They were the gatekeepers of 80% of all the magical weapons, armor, and items. Their race had a natural knack for smithing and creating, which also caused them to have the most runesmiths from everyone. Being a runesmith and a dwarven runesmith was also seen differently. The race of craftsmen had a long history and shared secrets among each other. They were seen as superior item makers. When people had a choice between a human or a dwarf, they would always go with the latter for blacksmithing. "Stop shaking me around, oh old man." The guildmaster continued to berate Armand while finally letting him down to the ground. He then turned over to Elydia while maintaining the menacing look. "Go file the paperwork and don't think I don't know what you were trying to do here. Next time something like this happens you will also be out of a job." The woman with glasses went pale in the face while bowing before the guildmaster. "My apologies, I'll go get it done swiftly." The other guild members that were here remained silent and soon started to stand up. Armand was a bit stunned by the decision and it looked like he wanted to say something. One stare from the large man that owned this place was enough to make him not to. "Okay, everyone get back to work, this hearing is now over." Armand managed to stand up from the ground and it looked like he wanted to contest this decision. Before he could do that, Elydia approached him, started to yank him out of the room. In time Armand dropped his shoulders in defeat and followed along, the look of defeat plastered on his face. The two didn't look all that happy about this resolution, but the guildmaster word was the rule. They soon left, probably to carry out the orders. Armand would be keeping his adventurer card, but he would lose his position. He was still a promising silver rank adventurer, so this wasn't the end of the world for him. There were many ways to make money even without those bonuses he received by being an instructor. For Roland this was enough of a punishment. He didn't want to push his luck with this guildmaster that was now showing some interest in him. At his word, the people started to stand up. Bernier, that was next to Roland, remained quite quiet during this whole predicament. The half-dwarf looked a bit pale, probably a bit affected by the guildmaster's killing aura. "Everyone but you, kid, that is." "Hey." Roland was about to call it a day but was held back by a rather large hand. He considered himself to be tall, but this guildmaster made him look like a 10-year-old. "Me? Is there something else?" He looked up at the man. The baldy before him was back to being all smiles. This person was quite fast to change his mood. It was better not to get on his bad side though, otherwise you could be shaken around violently like Armand. Yes, human Rune Smith, we need to talk about money. Roland wanted to refuse at first, but after thinking it through he just nodded. This was the guild master he was talking with. There was a certain degree of respect that he was required to show here. Otherwise, he could be very well removed from the guild as well. Besides that, he was also interested in what this man was offering. It seemed that he wanted to strike a deal with him, probably to craft weapons for the guild while abandoning the auction house. About money, not that many guilds offer runic weapons or armor. Exactly. The bald man nodded while the others slowly removed themselves from this room. Bernier remained next to Roland while not knowing what to do. He wasn't really an adventurer, so he didn't feel like the guild master here could order him around. The only person he would actually listen to was his own boss. It's fine, Bernier, just wait for me, this shouldn't take long. Roland told Bernier to wait for him, mostly as he wasn't sure if his assistant should be walking back home alone without protection. He looked a bit meek today and was probably stressed after seeing Dread and try to escape from their faith. Okay, boss. Just don't drink too much. Bernier turned around while trying not to show his facial expression. You make me sound like some kind of drunkard, boss. Roland didn't reply to that as he just stared at his assistant's back. It seemed that the mention of alcohol had at least helped Bernier recover his humor. You done? Yes. Follow me, kid. The guildmaster smirked while finally getting out of the room that the hearing took place in. Outside he could see some blood and cracks in the walls. It looked like Dread and did meet a demise. The half-orc was nowhere to be seen, probably stuck guarding the 5 ruffians after beating them up. The other people weren't there anymore either. Elydia was probably filing out some paperwork to get her younger brother removed from the guild roster. Just as the guild master ordered, he followed behind him. This was the first time he was this far back here, so he took time to look at this guild. They went through a long corridor with various doors on the side. Some of them were labeled while others remained a mystery. One room was used for monster part harvesting. Normally here they would just be allowed to deliver the parts to a side room while given a slip that proved what they left. A person could just leave a whole monster carcass and be given the regular market rate for it. They could also decide to wait. The guild would then sell off the parts, and depending on the quality they could get more gold. This way mostly brought in more money but took a lot longer. Most adventurers were fine with taking an average cut and using that gold instantly. There was a large aversion to banks in this world. They mostly functioned with merchants and nobles, while the adventurers liked to carry their winnings around with themselves. On this level was where the guild instructors were stationed. Armand could have occupied one of these rooms. They were named instructors, but they were required to do many other tasks which could range from training people to monster slaying. Quite often they were hired by merchants or nobles to protect their kids that descended into the dungeon for the first time. While the young masters and misses were hunting monsters, they would guard them against any unforeseen disasters. This type of work was risky. If a noble child died during such a mission, the instructor would be held accountable. They could then end up as a slave or even dead, depending on how influential their noble parents were. Besides that, he also spotted some potion-making rooms. The guild apparently did hire some alchemists to produce potions cheap. Ordering them from stores always brought in lower margins for them. This was probably also why the guild master was now interested in Roland. The guild offered some weapons, but they were mostly overpriced and only there for when an adventurer had no other choices or lacked time to get a proper weapon from a reputable store. After getting through this corridor, they moved upstairs where the guild master's office was. On the way, he could see some other offices belonging to different high-ranking officials. There were positions like vice guild master or a guild treasurer, and they were also here. Where he was going though was the office at the very end and with the biggest door. Take a seat, kid. The guild master pushed the door open with one hand and the two walked in. Roland took a second to look around this place, and the first thing that he noticed was the giant black desk at the end of the room. Behind it was an equally large-sized armchair where the guild master sat down in. It was clear that these items were custom-made for this baldy as they were far too large for any regular human being. While looking for a seat, he also noticed the many monster heads hung up on the walls. They all looked to be evolved monsters or beasts. They were probably all hunted down by this man. He spotted a couple of chairs to the side. It was a bit strange how they varied by size, but it all made sense all things considered. Races here all varied in height, so having chairs to fit them all was actually a good idea. He grabbed the one that was human-sized and placed it in front of the desk where the bald man was sitting. "So what would you like to discuss, Guild Master?" "Let's get right to the point then. I want you, kid." "You want me?" Roland flinched a bit at this reveal. He also noticed that the bald guild master was looking at him with passionate eyes, which brought him to one conclusion. "Sorry, but I don't swing that way." Could this be why this muscle monster was hesitant to remove Armand from the guild faster? The guy was a handsome young man. What if this guy just liked to keep those types around? "Hey, stop looking at me like that and stop backing away, you stupid brat." The man slammed his hand on the giant desk, which shook around but somehow remained intact. It was clearly made from a superior wooden material that could take these tier 3 hits. "I want you to work for the guild and only for the guild." Roland gave out a sigh of relief as he didn't think that he could win a one-on-one fight with this man. At most he could spray some icicles in his face and make a run for it. Why would you want to hire an unknown rune smith? Even one that is a human. Craftsmen that weren't dwarves were seen as slightly worse in a general sense. Their racial traits were just fashioned to work with molten metal and hammers. They also had a vast history and many hidden techniques that were not shared with any other races. "That's why I want to hire you. You are unbound by them, a blank slate." While they were talking, Roland noticed a strange shift in the mana around the guild master's desk. Almost instantly after this strange feeling, a person barged in through the door with something in her hand. "I brought it, Guild Master." The one bursting in through the door was the elven receptionist that he usually visited. The item that she was holding was wrapped up in cloth and was placed on the Guild Master's desk. Roland could somewhat tell what was in this cloth by the general shape. The Guild Master didn't wait long before pulling this cloth to the side and revealing the weapon inside. "This is..." "Yes, it's one of yours." What they were looking at was a long sword that Roland had made about a month ago. It was created from deep steel and had a mana stone in the hilt along with 2 runic enchantments. The craftsmanship of the sword is only adequate. Roland took a critical hit to his pride instantly. He knew that he wasn't the best blacksmith and most of his weapons came out at an intermediate grade. But that isn't important, these runes on the other hand are perfect. "You have a talent for rune smithing." His runes were a notch above the rest. Most new runesmiths that just started out would have a hard time inscribing a basic rune at the intermediate level. He on the other hand only produced the high and highest ones. One part of this was that he could improve on every schematic thanks to his skill. The other was his work ethic that brought him this far. Then another was the talent for mana, which aided in the creation of these runes. Most dwarven runesmiths had a fatal weakness. Their race was not the best with mana, as they were mostly given warrior and crafting professions. Their magicians were inferior in some ways to humans and elves, thus a lot of them chose to go with runesmithing or enchanting instead. "Thank you, but what are you offering me here?" Roland was not keen on working for anyone besides himself at this point. This didn't mean that he could not be swayed into a sort of partnership. This all depended on what he would get from this exchange. If it was just a small contract to limit himself to the guild with sales, then he would probably refuse. The rates in the auction were not that good, but the bidding wars that sometimes transpired there made up for it. The prices were sometimes hiked up to twice or more of what the item was worth. "I see that you aren't convinced. Well, let us talk business then." Roland recalled the old gnome that he had a similar conversation before. He wasn't really that interested in this offer, but there was no problem in hearing this guild master out. Maybe the deal would be better than anticipated, and having the guild master on your side was always a good thing. Chapter 105, Getting Drunk. So what do you think, kid? Should be a good deal for ye. Roland eyed the parchment in front of him. It had already been an hour since the hearing took place and Armand was probably relieved of his position by now. He on the other hand was led up to the guildmaster's office and was now looking through a sort of contract. It wasn't an actual contract yet though, just a list of what he would be getting for working with the guild. He would need to stop selling his wares at the auction house. This was more or less the only thing that the guild wanted. His runic weapons would be placed in the guild-run shops that were in the city as well as in this building. The guild operated in one main location, but that didn't mean that they didn't own other businesses in this city. They sponsored people that could bring in profits like alchemists or monster butchers that were good at deconstructing monsters for parts. Roland was not too keen on giving up his freedom. Ever since Edelgard and the cultist debacle he stopped trusting large companies. Even if they made a contract it didn't mean that they would keep it while he on the other hand would be bound to it. In return for signing himself over to the guild, he would receive several bonuses. From what he could tell these bonuses were similar to what instructors like Armand were getting. Discounts to potions, more gold for monster parts, and access to some guild facilities if he ever wanted. I don't think I can make a decision right now, I'll borrow this and I'll tell you within the week. After going through the hearing he was getting tired. Not physically but mentally, as he still wasn't used to being around so many people and talking with them. There was also Bernier that had been waiting for him for the past hour. He was starting to feel bad for his assistant as well as Agni that was left behind in a special room in his secret workshop. Not convinced? Anything that would sway your mind. The guildmaster gave out a sigh after hearing Roland's answer. The two had gone back and forth while going through the contract. He did notice that he started losing Roland's attention after mentioning giving up rights to selling items at the auction house. Sway my mind. Roland had gotten up by now and was about to head out of the guildmaster's office, but then he remembered something. There was a certain manufacturing method that he wanted to get his hands on. Well, if you can get me the schematics for the mana stone smelter along with the recipe for the mana alloys. This was one of the rune smithing secrets that he desired to get. With the correct smelter and the recipe on how to make specific mana alloys, he would be able to ditch the flashy mana stone design. He would be able to just integrate it into the structure of the weapon or armor. This had multiple advantages, one being that there would be more surface for runic inscriptions. The other is that it would be impossible to knock the mana stone out of the weapon, which would ruin the whole runic structure. This advanced runesmith technique required two things. A special smelter that had a specific runic structure. One that only produced fire wasn't quite enough, he somewhat knew that this special smelter would shape the mana alloy in some way. Then he needed the actual manufacturing method, otherwise, he could have to spend months or even years testing everything himself until something stuck. Mana stone smelter, that's quite the little contraption you want, but... The guildmaster leaned back in his chair and started rubbing his chin. It was clear that he was thinking hard about the pros and cons of such a transaction. Roland knew that the price for something like that would be high. It wasn't out of the realm of possibilities. If this man had the connections, he might be able to get him what he needed. Give me a few weeks, I'll see what I can do, but you better prepare. The man slammed his large hand on the larger desk and made it shake some more before standing up. You'll have to make it worth my time, kid. Roland knew that this meant that he would need to make quite a lot of runic items for the guild. This didn't mean that he would need to craft everything himself. There were enough advanced blacksmiths that could prepare the items and he would just add them his flair. Which was what the guild master was aiming for, as he already saw his average-looking weapons with the above-average runes. If you can find me those, then perhaps. He wouldn't just agree at this very moment, but he did want those schematics. An alloy like that would be perfect for something like a magical golem. Having it not be covered in mana stones would help out for something that needed to be durable. Perhaps? Listen here, kid, I'll have to contact some of my associates, but don't think that you'll get anything before signing that contract. Do you even know how much something like this costs? Roland nodded at the guildmaster's reasoning. Why would he go through getting a costly item only for Roland to say that he didn't want it anymore? He would be stuck with something he had no use for other than selling it on the auction house for a lesser price. Good point. Are you sure you can procure it? The guildmaster rubbed his chin again, but instead of a confident response he just shrugged. As I said, give me some time. Apparently, he was also not sure if he could get his part of the deal done. Roland would need to return later or have them send him another letter. I see. I'll just read through this again and you can get back to me once you have everything sorted out. Roland waved the parchment with the bonuses that the guild was offering him. The things in this list were tempting, but they weren't really a deal breaker. If he had to choose between them and the manufacturing method, he would go with the runesmith knowledge. With it, he could just charge more for his wares and they would also last longer. If it was possible, Roland would even pay extra just to get his hands on that knowledge. It seemed that this guild master wanted him badly on his side. Rune crafting was a rare profession that could elevate an adventurer to new heights. He was probably hoping to sell the weapons and armor, which would then cause the adventurers to hunt more monsters. With more dead monsters came more monster parts and even more gold. For someone that looked like a muscle-bound idiot, this guild master was quite cunning and hungry for money. I'll have one of the girls prepare the contract. The two exchanged some words before Roland left. Before going through with anything, the guild master would see if it was possible to get what he asked him for. If not, then they would be back at square one and a new exchange would need to be proposed. Sorry about that, we can go now. Roland arrived at the main guild area where all the adventurers were busy picking up new missions. He found Bernier at the pub section. The half-dwarf was noticeable due to the number of beer mugs on the table. Before he could scold him about his alcohol addiction, he noticed someone else sitting at his assistant's table. Armand. "Boss, you're finally here." Bernier looked ecstatic that Roland was back from his business talks. It was clear that something was wrong with this picture. Armand, that they had failed a complaint about, was in the process of drinking some alcohol. "What's going on here?" Roland whispered to Bernier while looking at the muscle brain from the corner of his eye. "He just sat down next to me and started drinking and complaining." Bernier whispered back while trying to explain. After the hearing was over, Armand's instructor rights were revoked and he lost all of his nice bonuses. The two started whispering for a moment and Bernier gave a recount of what transpired after Roland went away. 40 minutes earlier. "Hey barkeep, hit me up." "Sure thing." Bernier called out to the person behind the counter and was given 2 mugs filled with alcohol. He set them down on a table that was free and began relaxing. The only thing that was on his mind was to get back home and how nice it felt to see those thugs being abused by that large half-orc. "Serves those bastards well, good riddance." While holding up his mug in the air, he did a little cheer while some people wondered what was wrong with him. Bernier didn't care. Finally, things were looking up for him. There were plans of expanding the workshop and he was about to begin his Tier 2 journey. He was aiming to become an armorsmith to help out Roland. The biggest thing he was excited about was a proposition that he was given. His boss mentioned that he was spreading himself thin. He wanted to focus on rune crafting, but due to this his blacksmithing skills couldn't keep up. So then he offered Bernier to take some of that burden off him. The half-dwarf would be tasked to create the armor shell for him while he inscribed it with his runes. Roland would still craft the weapons himself, but the armor would be Bernier's task. Being someone that was dreaming of becoming an armor maker since a young age, this was something he couldn't refuse. The need to go back to his own workshop and work was making him all giddy. There were so many types of armor that he wanted to create. Thanks to Roland, he would already be able to work with deep steel and the runic tools would speed everything up. They only needed to expand the underground workshop so that he would have space to work there himself. The dummy log shed would be now mostly used as his living quarters. While thinking about the future, he heard a loud sound. As he turned to it, he could see the man that his boss filed a complaint against. Armand was by the reception and talking with the glasses-wearing receptionist lady. Bernier had nothing better to do, so he listened in while being slightly afraid that this man could try to take his revenge at a later date. Calm down, Armand, you brought this on yourself. On myself? I thought you were on my side. The two started arguing with each other. Armand mostly threw out empty accusations while acting like a child. Soon a smacking sound resounded and a red handprint appeared on his face. Bernier raised his eyebrow after seeing the receptionist lady deliver this slap. Why did I even bother with someone like you? When will you grow up? A moment of silence descended upon the Adventurers Guild. Armand was shouting quite loudly so other people had noticed the scene. Most of the warriors were laughing from the side while finding it funny that Armand lost his position. Now they were whispering and Bernier could hear them clearly. Poor Elydia, heard she was running around the city searching for those witnesses. She did? Is that even part of her job as a receptionist? Apparently, the person that found those people to testify was the receptionist lady. Thanks to her dread end reached a timely demise. Bernier looked to the woman. If the scary muscle man wasn't there he would actually go thank her for helping him and Roland with this case. He still was a bit perplexed by her actions though. She helped them with that side of the hearing but also voted against punishing Armand when the time came. The only thing he could come up with is with her being too soft on this brother of hers. I bet she wanted to get Armand off the hook. Perhaps. On the other hand, the two guild workers that were talking thought she just did it to help her brother. If Amand got associated with Dread End he could have been punished even more. The witnesses made it clear that he was just someone that arrived there randomly and was not there during Bernier's attack either. At least that is what he could make out from their conversation. Then it happened, Armand that had been slapped started walking towards the guild bar. At this point, Bernier moved his gaze back to his alcoholic beverage. He then heard a strange thumping sound followed by wood cracking. To his dismay, the person that had it in for his boss was now sitting at the table behind him. The two had their backs to each other which caused Bernier a lot of stress. Hope boss comes back soon, it's already been 10 minutes. With not being able to control the situation he just continued to chug on his drink while Armand behind him did the same. At first, it seemed that he was being civil but after a couple of quick drinks the angry grunts behind Bernier turned to strange mumbles. Hey! Roland's assistant then felt something large pushing against his back. When he turned around he noticed that Armand was leaning back while having trouble keeping his balance. Is he drunk already? It seemed Armand had zero tolerance for alcohol. After a couple of filled mugs his face was all red and his speech was broken up. UHG, who's that? Hey, don't I know you? Bernier was noticed sitting alone while waiting for Roland to come back. Armand had lost all of his reasoning and slumped forward right next to the half-dwarf. Heek. Whatever want to be my friend? No one respects me anymore. Heek. Bernier found a large muscular arm draped around his shoulder as Armand started hugging him as if they were some old drinking buddies. This is how he spent the next 20 minutes while the muscle brain whined about losing his position. A few minutes before Roland arrived he was able to flee as his drinking buddy had gotten too drunk to care. So that's what happened. Yes boss, think we should go. Roland was now looking at a drunk blockhead with his face against the table. His drink was spilled and he had a stupid expression on his face. Who gets this drunk in the middle of the day? This only made Roland look down on this young man even more. Due to this display of drunkenness, he was just making trouble for other people around him. Someone would need to clean up after him and maybe even carry him back home. Hope this guy learns something from this. Armand was, from what Roland knew, 22 years old. Which in his eyes made him a young brat. He himself would be in his late 30s if he added his life from his previous world. In that world, someone like Armand would probably still be stuck in a university or working a blue-collar job. Roland didn't like him but could see how this world could shape someone like him. The real challenge for this young man was progressing past this point and learning from his mistakes. Let's go back home. The sight of a drunk and defeated Armand brought less joy to Roland than he expected. While trying to get to the bottom of why he felt this way he was approached by the receptionist called Elydia. I'd like to apologize. Before the woman could speak up, he moved his hand up to stop her. Don't. It doesn't matter if you apologize to me, you didn't do anything wrong. Roland wasn't actually mad that this woman voted for her family member. He would have probably done the same if he was in her shoes. You should probably get this idiot a sobering potion before he makes a mess. Roland pointed to Armand that was wobbling around and slowly falling asleep. Elydia's eyebrows went into an angular shape as she looked at this brother of hers. Why yes, excuse me, Mr. Wayland. The woman still bowed before him while going over to Armand. It was finally time to return back to the workshop. That woman, think I've seen her around the city before. Is that so? Ah. Bernier looked as if he realized something as they were returning. With nothing better to do, the conversation shifted to a certain woman wearing glasses. Chapter 106 First Evolution. An orphanage. Hey. Roland awkwardly went into his house while thinking about the conversation that he had with Bernier. With nothing much to talk about, the conversation shifted to Elydia. Bernier had seen her going around the city with some young children not more than 5 years old. At first, Bernier thought that maybe the woman was the mother, but soon he discovered the truth. Some of the shopkeepers spoke up about how she was a hard worker. How she tends to an orphanage with some other young adults. Did I make a mistake? It also came out during the conversation that Armand was apparently also from the said orphanage. Bernier had heard this fact during Armand's drunken stupor. He had complained that it would be hard to feed the kids while also paying off the house mortgage. Roland was now second-guessing his decision of kicking the man to the curb. Though he wasn't sure about the costs of that house, he felt that if Armand managed his money right, he should be able to pay for something like that. He didn't know how many mouths they were feeding or if they were duped into paying too much for the large building. It was apparently somewhere in the city in a more costly part. Well, that woman didn't seem that mad though. He recalled Elydia's reaction. She even apologized for her older brother. If they work through it, they should be fine. Woof. Ah, I'm coming, wait a moment. His thought process was interrupted by a muffled bark. He headed downstairs into his workshop where Agni was sitting in. The small wolf puppy was left here as he couldn't bring him over to the guild. This was the only place he could leave him while being sure that he wouldn't destroy it. The inside of the house was not a possibility as he felt that Agni would trash it. Then escape and track him to the Adventurers Guild. The possibility of the little puppy being then slain was high. People could take him for a regular monster. Some others could also try to capture him instead, then sell him on the black market as he was a rare breed. I see that I'll have to air this place out. Roland opened the slab of metal that was his door and was hit in the face by a strong smell. It was clear that his puppy had relieved himself here. Luckily for him, he had placed Agni in a large cage which he could just carry outside and wash. Woof. Agni ran about 3 circles around his master before bolting through the opening outside. The small guy was smart to understand Roland's facial expression as he looked at Agni's present that he left behind inside of his cage. Ugh. While holding his breath, he carried the metal cage outside. Thanks to his enhanced strength, this wasn't anything difficult. Ha, maybe we should have taken him with us, boss. Bernier laughed from the side while Roland doused the cage with one of his water pressure wands. Ever since he started eating mana stones, the smell has been. Roland commented while using some flames on the metal cage to disinfect it. Does the mana make it extra fragrant? Bernier asked while peeking out of his log workshop. He was busy grinding away at some tools. Soon it would be time to get that tier 2 class. Roland had already given him a class change stone which would be coming out of his paycheck later. Now that you mention it. Roland brought up Agni's status screen while his wolf pup was running around the backyard. He zoomed in on the page with the skills and was pleasantly surprised. Mana Stone Eater did reach level 9. After seeing the skill finally reach the cap, he quickly went for the evolution options. After using the costly mana stones on his pet, he hoped that he would get another evolution that was even rarer than the gemstone wolf. Adolescent Volcanic Wolf. Fire/Earth/Beast. A common canine-type monster found in volcanic regions. Their noticeable feature is their growing mane covered in volcanic rocks. Adolescent ruby wolf. Fire/earth/beast. An uncommon canine-type monster found in volcanic regions. Their noticeable feature is their growing mane covered in rubies. Adolescent gemstone wolf. Fire/earth/beast. A rare canine-type monster found in deep dungeons. Their noticeable feature is their growing mane adorned with various gemstones. Hellhound puppy. Fire/fiend/beast. An uncommon canine fiend type of monster. This type of monster is regularly seen accompanied by demonic beings. Adolescent ash wolf. Earth/beast. A common canine-type wolf found in dungeons. They are characterized by having a white ashy fur pattern. Adolescent mystical ruby wolf. Fire/earth/beast. A rare variant of the ruby wolf monster, it is known for its high affinity for fire magic and high intelligence. Oh, a rare variant of an uncommon ruby wolf breed. There actually was another option that popped up. He now had an option to pick between two rare variants, a gemstone wolf or a mystical ruby wolf. What do you think, boy? Agni had stopped running around and was now sniffing Roland's leg. Due to him being in the city for so long, he had all kinds of scents stuck to him that this puppy could smell. Arf. The small wolf tilted his head to the side and then gave out a cute sneeze before walking away to dig up some holes. I figured. At this point in time, Roland had enough time to go through some monster tamer books that the city had to offer. He had managed to get a more thorough explanation of this gemstone wolf variant. It was a solid pick from what he could ascertain. This wolf was quite tanky, its fur slowly changed into hardened gemstones which could take some punishment. On the other hand, the ruby variants were mostly known for their high speed and fire-type skills. Both types would grow into large wolves that could rival horses after a while, but the gemstone wolf would be bulkier. Now with the new variant out there, Roland felt like he knew what to get. What he needed was someone that was fast and not to tank hits for him. He was already a tank and a caster in one, there was no reason for him to have Agni fill that role. What he needed him for was to discover monsters as a tracker and scout type. Then with the added magic affinity, the mystical ruby wolf could even give him some backline support. He was also trying to create golems, so he had not that much use for more tanky party members. Well, Agni, I'm not sure how this will feel, so brace yourself. At this moment the red puppy was wiggling his ruby-tipped tail while his head was underground. There was not much around to damage with the wind turbines being a bit to the side. I guess here goes nothing. Roland focused on the evolution option, it was akin to imagining a button press. The moment he did, the status window went blank for a moment before a prompt sprung up. Evolution in progress. He had thought that he had already gotten used to this game-like interface, but sometimes he was taken back by its functions. Roland glanced from the status window to where Agni's butt was sticking out. A noticeable change was taking place as the puppy's body began to glow. The small posterior of the puppy began to expand and some of its fur began to shed. It started falling to the ground while another coat of fluff shifted in its place. The hind legs extended and small ruby crystals started to emerge above the paw area. Oh? Is Agni evolving? Why didn't you call me over, boss? Bernier noticed the shine from the backyard. He had been busy crafting, so his attention was elsewhere. You looked busy. Roland didn't wish to interrupt a blacksmith during their work, as he was also one. All sorts of things could go wrong if a person was interrupted, so he just went through with the evolution. It's going faster than I expected. Within a minute the red glow subsided and Roland was looking at an enlarged backside of Agni. The rest of the body was still stuck underground, as he had chosen to go through with this while the puppy was digging a tunnel. He did get bigger. Should I go pull him out? Bernier asked while looking at Agni struggling to free himself from the small hole. After a few moments though, the pooch managed to free himself. Agni started sneezing a bit, then quickly shaking as if he was trying to dry himself after taking a dip in the river. Roland could now take a good look at his teenage puppy. The first thing that was characteristic was the assortment of gems on his legs. They went all the way up to his knees. His fur looked more robust and was also longer. His mane looked a lot bushier and he had a ruby sticking out of his forehead. His ruby-tipped tail got longer and the tip was quite a bit more pointy. The size of this adolescent wolf was close to a large dog, his head almost reached up to Roland's waist. Awoo! Agni gave out a howl after cleaning himself and trotted over to where Roland was. He then circled around his master a couple of times before looking up to him. Showing off your new form. Roland smiled a bit and placed his hand on top of Agni's head. After ruffling up his fur he gave the forehead gem a little poke. It was quite smooth and in a circular shape. It was quite small at about 2 centimeters in diameter, which was less than an inch. While petting his puppy he brought up his status screen to see what had changed. Name: Adolescent Mystical Ruby Wolf. L26x 0%. Type: Fire/Earth/Beast. HP: 313/313. MP: 341/341. SP: 499/499. Strength: 24. Agility: 39. Dexterity: 19. Vitality: 22. Endurance: 31. Intelligence: 23. Willpower: 20. Charisma: 17. Luck: 14. Agni got boosts to his stats akin to when he reached his Tier 2 Runesmith Lord class. There was a difference in people and monsters as he could see now. After the evolution was done there was no mention of the previous lesser evolved form. Only the adolescent mystical ruby wolf part was visible as if he had it from the first level. Roland also noticed a trait that wasn't there before. Mystical Tier 1. Trait: increases MP by 10%. This is similar to that one mana trait that I have. Roland had the Blessed by Mana trait that increased his mana by a set percentage just like this. It was one of the skills that allowed him to use his magical armor at a high proficiency and without the worry of passing out. He went through Agni's skills and noticed something strange. Skills like Ruby Tail Whip had a N sign after it. Bite and L1 passive skill. Increases the strength of biting attacks. Fiery Bite plus L1 skill. Discharge of flames during a bite attack. Ruby Tail Whip plus L1 skill. Skill can elongate the ruby tail of the monster, which then can be used as a means of attack. It was apparent that these were the advanced versions of those skills. They were probably similar to the ones humans got when basic skills transformed into regular ones. He has this one. Mana Sense L1. Passive skill. Allows the user to sense mana. He was surprised after finding one of his old passives in his tamed beasts repertoire. It was the skill that caused the original Roland to die and get the mana sickness disease. There were some skills missing though. There was no basic mana shaping and basic mana regulation was also missing. He took a note of this as this probably meant that Agni would not be able to cast spells quite yet. But this also meant that he might be able to do it after the next evolution. Maybe even this one if the skills get unlocked along the way. Roland rubbed his chin while thinking, there could be a couple of ways to unlock those magic caster skills. One of them would be just by leveling the wolf up, they would appear on their own and he wouldn't need to lift a finger. Then there was the more realistic one where Agni would need to level up the basic mana shaping skill to the maximum. After that, he might receive access to those two skills, either during this evolution or during the next one. He thought back to his youth when he was training his mana sense skill before the change to the mage class. He had to concentrate quite a bit to get it up, now his tamed monster would need to do the same. Roland glanced down at the now larger Agni who was getting rubbed behind the ear by Bernier. The long canine tongue was out and flopping about while he had a silly expression on his face. Can this idiot even learn a skill like that? Erwo. Agni looked up to Roland with an accusing look. It was as if he read his thoughts the moment he thought them. He then escaped from Bernier's clutches and stood proudly. "What are you?" Roland wondered if his wolf companion was mad, but before he could apologize, Agni started doing something interesting. The gem on his forehead began to glow in a faint light. Is he actually? After focusing on the mana in the surrounding, Roland could tell that it was being absorbed into Agni's forehead gem. The moment the mana was absorbed, the gem started to glow brighter and brighter as to signalize that it was working. "Ha, good boy." It seemed that Agni had mastered the mana sense skill and was even able to absorb the mana from the surroundings into his own body. This made Roland wonder if he could somehow teach Agni his mana reinforcement skill. Though to get it, the wolf would need the other basic mana skills that a mage received. It didn't look like the gem on the forehead had any uses, for now, it could only glow, which could only be useful in a dark cavern with no light. "He beat me to it." Bernier shook his head in indignation, as Agni had achieved his new evolution before the half-dwarf could progress to his tier 2 class. "How long till your level cap?" "Well, actually I reached it this morning." Bernier smiled weakly while lowering his voice. "That's great." Roland smiled back while looking at his assistant. He knew that Bernier had met all the requirements to get a new class, so he should be able to use the class change stone instantly. "Is everything all right?" He noticed that Bernier wasn't looking too happy about it, and he probably knew why. "Afraid that you might fail." "Ha, you know me well, boss." It was clear to Roland that this smithing job meant more to Bernier than it actually ever meant to him. He chose the path of the runesmith as it was the only one he thought could utilize the skills that he had and not due to him being passionate about it. On the other hand, his assistant was someone that wanted it badly. "It's okay, even if you don't pass on the first try, you can try again later." He tried to cheer him up, as he knew that Bernier did actually have a knack for creating items. "Thanks, boss. Got any tips?" Roland did previously do some research concerning tier 2 crafting classes, but he had already told Bernier what he should expect. If he was going for an armorsmith, then the test would be to create a piece of armor. It could be anything: a gauntlet, breastplate, or even a full suit of armor if he was unlucky. "Think I told you whatever I could, now it's up to you. Why do you think I told you to make all those armor pieces for the past month?" Bernier nodded while glancing back to his workshop. In it, on the table, he could see the crystal that would begin the job change quest. "I'll do it tonight." Both of them nodded at each other before going back to their own chores. Bernier continued practicing his craft while Roland went over to Agni. Not today, but soon he would need to take his teenage pup down into the dungeon to train again. Things aren't looking that bad. He looked over his home that was coming along nicely. The trouble in the city was cleared up, and it looked that the peaceful days would follow. Then the memories of certain cultists and thieves came flooding back into his mind, and a frown appeared on his face. "I should go figure out that golem system." Chapter 107. Don't like where this is going. I should just activate it. Yeah, do it as many times as you can. Okay, boss. Bernier and Roland were standing outside in the backyard. Agni was in the background chasing his own tail while the two were performing some tests. While holding a meter-long iron tube, Bernier started to insert mana into it. This tube had a couple of mana stones attached to them, and they lit up the moment the runic components were activated. Bernier could feel that a quick burst of high pressure was released from this tube, but nothing besides that. The initial activation made his hand jerk due to the blowback. He looked at Roland as if he was wondering if this was all. "Continue." Roland replied while watching his assistant activate this metal tube 6 times before reaching towards his forehead. 6 times before the first headache. "Yes, boss. Ouch, this stings. I don't know how you do it." Bernier started to rub his template as a similar sensation of when a person ate ice cream too fast washed over him. He wasn't sure why Roland gave him this tube, but he figured he would disclose the information soon. "Good now." Roland took the tube back and inserted something into it before giving it back to his assistant. Bernier peeked inside but couldn't really make out what his boss placed in there. "Okay, now point it at the dummy and activate it again." After getting a low-grade mana potion, Bernier looked at a straw dummy that he had made a day before. Roland ordered him to fashion one made from wood for testing some new items. The dummy looked more like a scarecrow, as Bernier didn't really have any experience in making ones before. Sure, activating now. He held it out with two hands this time around and also gripped it harder, as he was now used to the knockback. The moment he activated this tube again, he could see a round marble shooting out of it and going in the general direction of the straw dummy. The moment this large marble connected with the dummy, a small explosion occurred. This caused Bernier to jump back and fall onto his butt, while Roland just observed it while standing next to him. Not bad, but I think you need some aiming practice. One side of the dummy had been blown away by this explosion. Roland was just testing a new weapon that he intended to give to his assistant. Bernier had a meager mana pool which didn't allow for much runic equipment. Due to this, Roland decided to go with the disposable item route, scrolls to be specific. This design was a smaller version of his runic grenades that he once used against the bandits. That time around he just threw the round casings which had his scrolls inside them. Now he wanted to design a sort of launcher so that Bernier would be able to defend himself from attackers. First, he needed to test Bernier's mana capacity and how many times he would be able to use his new weapon. Then he would just need to come up with a design that was easy to aim with. Things like grenade launchers from his own world came to mind, but here a person wouldn't need a trigger but just to inject some mana. It looked like 6 shots would be the limit for Bernier before he would need to drink a mana potion. Thus an enlarged cylinder with 6 chambers for ammo would need to be made. He could always just give Bernier regular spell scrolls for protection, but having a weapon like this would help with aiming and a faster rate of fire. Roland was a bit surprised that no one came up with such a design. Most people still preferred to just use regular spell scrolls while holding them out against their enemies. Maybe due to the lack of gun-related technology, no one was interested in innovating in that direction. From what he knew, only large cannons like on the merchant ship he made the trip here existed. They were mostly relegated to siege weapons or defenses on castle towers. If you took into consideration that high-level archers could outperform modern-day firearms, then it made sense. His assistant, on the other hand, wasn't so good at throwing bombs, thus something he could steady his aim with could be a lifesaver. I guess no one really cares about making weapons for the non-combative classes. Okay, that should do it. Think we can move on to producing a prototype. Roland wondered if there would be a market for such items. This weapon made sense to him, who could actually produce the ammo himself. But for an adventurer, paying 1 large silver or more for one mini grenade would quickly bankrupt them. Aye boss, but you shouldn't forget about the guild. Don't forget the letter arrived. Roland grabbed the prototype rod that would be used for the launcher barrel. He wasn't really sure if he wanted to make it a 6-shooter or just a single. Bernier could just pop the grenade in through the top for a quick reload, which would simplify things but also make them slower. He was not someone that had ever been interested in guns that much, so he could mostly just borrow his ideas from the media he consumed and the current world's technology. Yeah, I remember. Did the guildmaster get those items for me? The bald guildmaster had promised to find him the manufacturing details for mana alloys along with how to build the smelter for it. It had been a couple of weeks since then, but only now had word reached them. There was also a possibility that he wasn't able to procure it and he would just give him the same sales pitch as before. I'll go there today, stay here with Agni and train up those skills. Bernier had also finally advanced to the Tier 2 armorsmith class. From what Roland was told, the item that he had to make was a half-plate armor. Half-plate armor was similar to plate armor but lacked some parts like leg protection and a helmet. When asked about the time limit, Bernier was surprised. He was apparently allowed to take his time, and only when he was done the final product was tested by the class-up system. Roland wanted to file a complaint to the people that made this system. He always received a timer and had to rush through things. The reason for that was probably the rarity of the classes that he went for. Bernier chose the most generic one, which made the tests quite easy. It was still a Tier 2 class though, and with it, Bernier was the proud owner of the armorsmith class. Now finally he would be able to craft the armors that he always dreamed about. With the added skills this would become easier. Roland had also taken in some knowledge that Bernir had to offer. He was the son of a dwarven blacksmith that had also been an armorsmith apparently. Thanks to this Roland could learn a couple of smithing techniques that he wasn't clued in. With this more advanced tier 2 class and heightened dexterity, it was easy to replicate what Bernir was proficient in. Boss, I'll use these if anything happens so you don't need to worry. Bernir pointed to his hip where he had a couple of card-sized scrolls. The weapons weren't ready so the best defense for Bernir were the magic scrolls. Roland wished to miniaturize this grenade launcher as much as he could, make it more portable like a real gun. For that, he needed to further his compression skill. Just too many things to do. Roland had been having trouble focusing on one thing lately. Agni needed further training as his level didn't go up much since he evolved into the larger form. He also was working on his golem design and still decrypting the runic code that would be the basis for it. Then there were his own skills and the defenses for his home, plus he also needed to be making weapons and earn money to support himself and his assistant. At least with Bernir helping him out now, he wouldn't need to focus on armor as much. The only downside to this was that the corresponding skills for armor crafting wouldn't be going up as much. He intended to combat this by making some armor parts together with his assistant. With some help he would be able to create more improvements and do it faster. Wonder if that Baldy really got those schematics. Roland closed the door behind him while also telling Agni to stay and protect the house. The Ruby Wolf was quite intelligent and could follow simple orders like this. At this point he would not chase after him into the city, nor would he destroy the inside of the house if left alone. It was truly astonishing how much a being could change by evolving. It was as if a 5-year-old child changed into a 15-year-old teenager that could be now left alone at home by his parents. This didn't mean that he could leave him there for long. The tamed beast would come looking for his master if he vanished for more than a day. Even though his face was already seen by the guild members he still was used to covering it up with his helmet. Roland's armor was repaired and shiny as ever, the mana stones made it look even more expensive. He hoped to get this fixed with the mana alloy manufacturing method. It would let him be more inconspicuous as this armor made him stick out like a sore thumb. He wouldn't be surprised if someone decided to rob him one of these days just to get their hands on this piece of gear. "Welcome Mr. Wayland, the guild master is in his office, please wait here for a moment." After coming to the guild he was greeted by the elven receptionist lady. The one wearing the glasses was still there but when he glanced her way she evaded his gaze. He wasn't sure but he attributed this to the way the hearing went and how she tried to sway it in one direction. He wasn't really mad at her as she just wanted to protect someone from the orphanage that she was running. Roland was a bit preoccupied with himself so he wasn't paying attention to how the people in this world had problems of their own. Poverty and lack of food being one of the biggest of those problems. When you looked at this kingdom and compared it to the modern world that he came from, it was similar to a third world country. The nobles were more akin to warlords than to politicians. They could do anything they wanted in their own territory without really having to put up with the commoners. The only thing that they would be afraid of would be people with higher tier classes. Strength was mightier than the coin in this world. Someone at a very high level could also throw their weight around. Unless they did something drastic, no one would stop them. This privilege only started after you approached tier 3 though, and this was also one of Roland's main goals. Become as powerful as he could and then become free of the shackles that his noble birth was putting on him. "You may enter now." After waiting for a bit he was finally told to go to the guild master's office. On his way here he spotted someone coming down from the upper level. There were 3 people coming his way. The moment he looked at them he started to frown. Luckily his face was covered by his helmet so they couldn't see it. Nobles. The man in the front was clearly not a commoner. The fabrics and style didn't match up to what an adventurer would be wearing either. He also had 2 guards following behind him. They were wearing half-plate armor without any helmets. There was an unfamiliar crest that adorned their chest plate but it also confirmed his suspicions. But not quite, a butler. After taking a moment to look at the noble, he noticed that something didn't add up. The clothes were costly, but the man didn't fit the bill. He was more in line with a messenger sent by a noble, which made more sense. Why would a noble venture into the Adventurers Guild by themselves and with only 2 guards? What do you think you are doing? Make way. Roland was a bit surprised by meeting this group, so he had spaced out while walking forward. Due to this, he forgot to move to the side to let them through. Even if these people weren't actual nobles, they were part of their organization. Going against them was close to spitting on the crest that they were wearing. Even if he didn't like the treatment, he knew that it was better to avoid any conflict. Thus, without replying to the angered butler, he decided to move to the side and let them through. Though he did show the proper manners, the old man decided to give him a few chosen words before moving along. Damn uncultured adventurers! At least you are smart enough to know your place. The guards that were with this man gave Roland a harsh look before all of them moved along. The man in the middle didn't look very similar to the butler back at home. That man had style and knew how to present himself. This person, on the other hand, was overweight and looked like a sleazeball. The clothes that he was wearing were also quite flashy, as if he wanted to bring attention that he was part of the noble caste. What was that all about? That crest, it does not belong to the noble house that owns this land. Roland stood there in the corridor while looking behind him. The people that passed him didn't seem to belong to the estate that ruled this city. This was actually the first time that he had seen a worker from a noble house in this city. Albrook was still in the process of development. More and more people were coming while searching for riches down in the dungeon. The noble house that ruled this area didn't seem to be that interested in this location. The most important spot was still the super dungeon that was in the middle of this large island. He turned around and headed up the stairs. The appearance of these people didn't have to mean much. The most plausible reason that they were here was to give a specific mission to the guild. If it was an important one, then probably some of the higher-ranked adventurers would be forced to take it. These sort of missions tasked by nobles were mostly placed in the hands of the guild instructors. He was not planning to get involved with nobles. The pay might have been good, but the dangers could be unknown. While thinking about what the butler might have wanted from the guild master, he knocked on the door. "Come in." There was a little pause after he knocked, but the guild master was inside. Roland opened the large door and could see a bald man sitting behind his desk while looking at some papers. His brows were furrowed and his forehead was showing a lot of wrinkles. Due to this, Roland decided not to poke the hornet's nest. "Sorry for the wait, kid. Had to deal with a pompous fool. Take a seat." The old warrior stopped looking at the piece of parchment and Roland was allowed to sit. He removed his helmet now, but he was glad that he didn't show his face to the worker from the noble house. "Do you want to hear the good news or the bad news first?" Roland looked up to the old man that had a smirk on his face while not really knowing what he was getting at. "Good news. Ha, I managed to find a dwarf that is willing to sell those manufacturing secrets." "But," he replied as he realized that there was something off. "But he is a greedy little bastard. Here, take a look." Roland was handed a piece of paper. After he looked at it, he realized why this was the bad news. "Tell me that this price is in small gold coins." "You got a good sense of humor, kid. This price is a bit. Your skills are worth much, kid, but not that much. If you want us to make a deal, you'd have to cover half of that sum." Roland started making calculations in his head, of how much he would need to sell to make a dent in this bill. It would at least take 4 or more years until he could pay up. "Don't need to frown that much, kid. I can reduce that bill further, but you'll have to do something for me." The guildmaster leaned back while showing off his pearly whites. Roland's forehead started to show a bit of a sheen as he didn't like where this was going. Chapter 108 Another Expedition and Preparations. "You want me to be a babysitter? Ha, that's what I like about you, kid, you catch on fast." Roland was rubbing his temples while looking at the guildmaster. The man was dangling the manufacturing methods to the mana alloys and to the special smelter in front of him. The horrendous price seemed like it was just an excuse to shove a particular mission on him, one that involved the nobles. This mission isn't even that hard, kid, you just join the expedition and protect those snooty noble brats. The guildmaster had already revealed what he wanted Roland to do. In a month's time, a group of noble youths would arrive in this city. These kids were members of influential noble families that studied at the various noble academies. Some would be from the Knight Academy, the same one that Roland was supposed to go to when he was still living at the Arden estate. He wasn't sure if it was exactly the same one, as there were more of them across this kingdom. The Knight Academy wasn't the only one that was sending young nobles over, though. It was a joint venture with the Magic Academy. From what Roland knew, this was something the older students had to do when they were close to graduation. The academies would send them out to do missions like this. They would need to venture towards dungeons for a time with a couple of instructors and be judged. It was something like a rite of passage where they needed to prove that they could fight under pressure. This dungeon had not yet fully been explored, but the levels could be rated. The first 10 levels were good for anyone to get the hang of it. The level Roland had been venturing to was also rated as something that silver adventurers like him would be able to handle. No monsters above the 150th level had been spotted, which was the Tier 3 barrier. Why do you want me to be there? I'm sure there are other adventurers. Ha! The guildmaster gave out a sigh as his big grin subsided. I wish that was true, but you recall our little Armand? Yes. He was actually someone that was more dependable than most of those other idiots. You must be joking, how could he be? Think you two got off on the wrong foot, he is surprisingly dependable when it comes to fighting. Roland didn't reply to that as he started weighing the options. It seemed that this guild was still not fully operational. If they were, then this guild master wouldn't be asking him to take on an important mission like this. They were talking about noble children here. They were the future of their houses. If something went wrong during the mission, then their heads would roll. He would need to risk his life to protect those young brats on the off chance that a unique monster appeared. You worry too much, kid, you'll only be going into the volcano area. Those brats are there to gain some battle experience, they will also have instructors from the academy with them. You and the other adventurers will only need to guide them there. And act as bait if something goes wrong. Can't hide anything from you, kid, but that's why I like you. Listen, you can either sign up for this mission or cover the costs for the items you want instead. Let me think about it. Sure, you have a week, those noble brats will be arriving in a month, but before that, I need to have the team ready. This was understandable, the mission was quite important, so the participants had to be picked wisely. There was always a certain ratio that went into a party of adventurers. The basic composition had some warriors along with backline supporters like archers. A healer would also be needed, but those were hard to come by, thus most people used potions instead. Then there were unique spots occupied by classes like mages that could fill more roles. I understand. After some more chit-chat, he finally left the guildmaster's office. There were a couple of things he needed to think about. The most important one, if it was smart to get involved with the nobles. While heading home, he contemplated on what was the correct thing to do. The guildmaster wanted him to be there due to his magic craftsman class. He did mention during the conversation that having someone there that could repair runic weapons would be handy. He would be also responsible for certain heat mitigating equipment that would be used. Roland also proved himself to be stronger than Armand, who was close to the 100th level. This would put him close to gold rank adventurers that had to have a minimal level of 100 and capped out at 150. Past the 150th level was the Tier 3 bump. After reaching that, a person was able to advance from gold to platinum rank as an adventurer. The mission was to venture below the labyrinth where he battled the ruby golem. Then remain in the lower regions for a few weeks. It was supposed to be a test for the noble sons and ladies that the academy organized. Down below he would also need to answer to the nobles. The group of adventurers, as he had mentioned before, was there as guides and also meet shields. If something did go wrong, they were required to use their bodies while the nobles escaped. This was only if there was some kind of unforeseen event. If everything went as planned, then it would be a very boring few weeks in a heated dungeon. He would only need to make some repairs to the equipment and together with the other adventurers work as a lookout. Yet because this was a mission given by the nobles, he would receive a massive reward. The high nobles were willing to pay a lot to have their kids protected. There would also be a platinum rank adventurer coming along, which made Roland consider this mission. It was the fastest way of getting what he wanted. With the new technology he would be able to create a competent battle golem body. The only real downside was working with nobles that he wished to avoid. The responsibility seemed to be high, but the job looked to not be that hard. He had already ventured into the dungeon many times and the tier 2 monsters weren't really a problem. From his perspective, the mission wasn't that dangerous but mostly annoying. He would need to take orders from noble children and act as a chaperone. I wonder how those brats are doing. While walking through the city he started thinking of his own family. He did have 3 brothers and sisters, with just one sister being younger than him. Roland was seen as almost the youngest child in the family, but if he added the age from his previous world he would be the oldest. I bet they don't even remember how I look by now. It had been many years since he had left that estate and was successful in slowly cementing his life here. He didn't feel like a noble anymore, just your regular commoner with a knack for crafting. Roland still felt a bit guilty about the lie that he told to Lucienne, but the girl was really young back then, only 3 years of age. The possibility of him leaving a long-lasting impression on her was quite faint. That will be 8 large silver coins. Roland placed some items into his storage bag while looking at his coin purse. There wasn't that much left in there. After spending quite a bit on the golem toy and then further house renovations, he was slowly becoming poor. His savings that he received from his severance package while leaving Edelgard had also dried up. Most of it went into the house renovations and deep steel that he used for his runic armor. If he wanted to get his hands on those manufacturing schematics, he would probably need to take the job or wait some years till he had enough money. The biggest downside to this was the possibility of the offer not being on the table down the line. He knew that these sorts of things were kept hidden from other races. The dwarves didn't like their secrets being spread around. The possibility of something like this being up on the auction was low. He would need to visit the black market for something like this and pay a premium price, which might be even worse than what the guild master was offering him. I think you should take the offer, boss. Dwarven knowledge like that almost never leaves a dwarf forge. Roland was now back at his own house. Both he and Bernier were down in the Rune forge crafting some gear. He had brought up this with his assistant as he also needed to know about this. You think so as well, hey? I know those old fogies, they would never sell outside their little circle. Bernier replied with a somewhat annoyed tone. Roland knew that the half-dwarf had a run-in with many blacksmiths and they all denied him entrance. He knew well how this race liked to keep their secrets hidden and only allowed the techniques to be passed on to true dwarves. That guild master must be crafty if he managed to procure this kind of knowledge. Wonder how he did it. Clang! Bernier's hammer descended on some metal as he got it into the right shape. The young Tier 2 craftsman was working on a breastplate. It wasn't for him but to be sold off later after some mana stones and runes were added to it. He could have access to the black market, or someone owed him a favor. Brrrr. Roland replied while sharpening a sword on his runic grindstone. With the added wind turbines outside, he and Bernier could use them at the same time. While working together, Roland could also compare his smithing skills to Bernier's. His assistant had lower stats. He couldn't hold a candle to Roland's dexterity and strength, but he made this up with knowledge. Bernier had spent his young life looking at his father crafting. Thanks to this, blacksmithing came naturally. The only thing that slowed down his progress was him getting a carpenter job as his default class. Roland looked at his sword that was finished. With some pointers and the right tools at his disposal, he was finally able to make a higher grade item. After adding some highest graded runes, this sword would go for quite the penny. Regretfully, even with this it wouldn't be enough to pay for those manufacturing schematics. He also needed to consider the costs of the golem that he was working on. I think this will be the fastest way. Roland also felt that he was still too weak. Even at Tier 2 he didn't feel like he would be able to handle a Tier 3 person in any way, shape or form. The members from that cult were still engraved deep in his mind. The fear that he felt during that night was still something that haunted him to this day. As things were now, he felt that he would not be able to protect himself or the people around him. Bernier was a non-combatant and Agni was quite young. Due to the money problem he wasn't able to wander down into the dungeon as often and level his monster. He would gain experience from crafting, but that would not be the case for Agni. The Ruby Wolf needed actual combat experience. Good sword, boss, what are you going to put on it? Roland was brought out of his trance by Bernier. Enhanced sharpening and strengthening seems to be popular with these. He replied, these two enchantments were as popular as ever. There existed Tier 2 versions of them that used up more mana but also produced better effects. Good choice. Bernier, how do you feel about living here alone for a few weeks? This was one of the biggest issues with Roland venturing out to the deeper parts of the dungeon. Normally they would leave their most precious items in a vault in the workshop. It was protected by many runic traps and locks. They would not leave for more than a day at a time. They would also take some of their items on the short expedition, so even if someone robbed the house they would have part of their wealth. Now on the other hand he would need to leave the house in the care of his assistant. This would be the prime moment for any thieves to show up, when the strongest person was away. Don't worry, boss, I can take care of myself. Hey, stop looking at me like that. Bernier moved his head to the side as Roland wasn't buying it. Not so long ago he was beaten up by adventurers without even landing one good hit. These thugs were then single-handedly taken out by Roland. We have about a month. Roland rubbed his chin as he thought about the logistics. Bernier would need to stay here as he didn't feel that he would be allowed to go. He also didn't want to leave the house unattended for a whole month. If something did happen, Bernier could still go to the city and ask for some help there. I'd be taking Agni with me. He started to formulate a plan, one that involved Bernier defending this home alone. Agni would need to come with Roland as he feared that the wolf would not listen to Bernier. He could even wander down into the dungeon alone in search of his master. It was also a good opportunity for his wolf to earn some experience. They would be down there for a while, so it was paramount to use this time to gain more power. I won't be able to create the golem in a month, but we can strengthen the fence and you will need a weapon. A weapon? I'm not really good with swords or axes. I was thinking of something less close and personal. A plan for his future departure entered his mind. He started contemplating on what would be the best option for this dwarf. He came to the conclusion that ranged weaponry would be the best as Bernier didn't possess any type of fighting skills. This could be circumvented by the use of magical items which Roland was able to create. After we are finished here, go buy me some magic ink and a lot of magic paper. The decision was made, he would be going down into the dungeon together with the nobles. Before that some preparations needed to be made. He would need to get this house and his assistant ready for whatever event that could go wrong. He also remembered how his last expedition ended up. Roland needed to procure life-saving items for himself as well. If a Tier 3 monster appeared, he needed some kind of trump card. He already had a few ideas about that, but it would cost more money. Think we will need to sell more items to the auction house this month. Let's get back to work. Aye, boss. The two craftsmen continued with their work. They needed more funds to create better equipment and time was running out. Luckily for them, with the runic tools and fully operational wind turbines, they would be able to hasten the process. I might have to give that runic printing press idea a try. What Bernier would be getting would be a lot of runic scroll-related weapons, along with a few others that Roland wasn't quite decided upon. Soon the hours and days started flying by. The weather continued to be warm and pleasant. Roland had confirmed that he would be participating in this expedition. He was given the rundown by the guild master about what his duties would be. The leader of the party would apparently be a Tier 3 adventurer that would arrive later from another guild. Roland's duties would be to keep an eye out for the nobles and also to repair the weapons and armor along the way. The faithful day of his departure finally arrived. what was left to do was do one last check before he said his farewells to Bernier and left the house in his care. Chapter 109 Pre-Preparations. The time for the dungeon expedition was just 1 day away. Roland and Bernier were both inside the workshop while Agni was keeping watch outside. There was some business Roland needed to take care of at the guild today before the nobles arrived. He needed to meet up with his temporary party members as everyone would be given a specific job that would fit this mission. The party leader had apparently arrived and he would be assigning the positions. This brought Roland back to that one other large expedition that he was a part of. That time he was relegated to the back line and placed in a team with lower-level adventurers. While this time his worth had increased, he wasn't sure where he would end up in. There was a reason why he wasn't worrying as much though. The guild master wanted his rune smithing skills. It would be counterproductive of him to send him towards his demise. That's why a position in the back line was more than likely. Before going out to the city there were a few things that he and Bernier needed to discuss. He would be leaving together with Agni for a few weeks. Apparently, the noble youths needed to complete some sort of exam. For this, they needed to last for a prolonged amount of time while surrounded by enemies. It was something that this kingdom thought out to train their younger generation for the coming battles. This wasn't an era of peace and the nobles would be the future commanders and generals. Everyone needed to be able to protect themselves or at least know how to use their troops and ration their supplies. From what Roland knew, he and the adventurers were more of a backup plan. They were there to guide the people inside and make sure that nothing goes wrong. The nobles from the academy would have their own soldiers and provisions that they needed to figure out how to use. Only when something unexpected happened would the adventurers get involved. They were there to lure away any potential threats that the nobles wouldn't be able to handle. Things tended to go towards the unexpected in his life. Even at that previous expedition, he didn't think that he would get buried in the mine and then almost die against a tier 3 monster. Okay, let us go over this one last time. Roland handed Bernier an improved version of the runic grenade launcher that he had built throughout this month. It did not look like a basic tube now but as a proper ranged weapon, not like one that you would find in this world though. The most noticeable thing was the middle part, which had a large-sized cylinder. It looked like an enlarged revolver cylinder with 6 chambers. It wasn't quite like it as there was a manual crank next to the grip of this launcher. Bernier would need to crank it to make the chambers rotate into place before firing off one of the runic grenades that Roland had prepared beforehand. The handle was made from wood and fitted with Bernier's hands in mind. Being half-dwarf left the young man with thick hands, so even if Roland tried it he would be able to shoot this weapon. There was a secondary grip at the front part that connected to the barrel. It was there to aid with the aiming as the weapon had some kickback to it. As with all of his creations, this one also had some mana stones embedded in the design. They were all green, as instead of small explosions that were produced by gunpowder, this one operated more like an airsoft gun. The mana usage was actually lessened with the wind pressure rune than if he used a small explosion type rune instead. For the ammo, he used small runic scrolls with various spells. It was all set up that when the orb that the scroll was in collided with something it would be activated. Most of them would just explode while causing residual damage with shrapnel that came from the metal casing. But there were various spell combinations that Roland had shown Bernier. If he was smart about it he could clear out more enemies with less. Roland would like to have this weapon spin the chamber on its own, but there wasn't any time to figure out the mechanism. He wasn't much of a gun nut in his previous life, so he went with a more mechanical approach and a crank that spun the cylinders around instead. The thing that he made was more of a portable runic cannon than a proper gun. He even received the Cannon Craftsman title for it. Maybe if he was able to make a revolver or something similar he would be able to attain a gunsmith title. Though he wasn't sure if he wanted to go in this direction. He already had reusable runic equipment that didn't require him to create reusable ammo. Someone like Bernier was more suited for that path choice, as he didn't have any battle skills to speak of. You sure come up with peculiar things, boss. Bernier held the portable cannon in his hands and pointed it in a direction. He was a tier 2 blacksmith, so it wasn't that hard for him to use it with one hand either. Remember to only use this when you really need it and keep your distance. Most people should just run after a few warning shots. I'd be running for the mountains if someone used this thing against me. Bernier had used this launcher a few times on the straw dummies in the backyard. He had riddled the ground with holes from the explosions, but after a while, he got the hang of it. After some use, he had even gotten the basic cannoneer skill. This skill slightly boosted a person's aim whenever they used cannon-type weapons. Apparently, the armorsmith class was enough to allow him to get that skill. You'll also need this, remember to bury them discreetly. Next came the mind scrolls. Agni would be away for the time being, so there was no danger of the ruby wolf to set off the traps. After Roland was gone, Bernier was tasked to place these scrolls around the house and mostly close to where the fence was. The moment someone jumped over it, they would set it off. The fence would also be charged up with some electricity. This would just give everyone a little jolt to keep them from advancing forward. Roland was slightly afraid that some kids could decide to pay the strange craftsman a visit. He didn't want to have any child deaths on his conscience. If they decided to jump over to the other side even after reading all the warning signs and after passing the electric fence, then it was on them. Lessening the strength of the mind scrolls would just endanger his assistant and his own home. What about these? Bernier took out something that looked like a deck of cards. These were the same mini scrolls that Roland used, and now they were also given to Bernier. Use them if the runic launcher fails you. Remember, even if they are scrolls, they still require some mana to activate. Bernier nodded while placing the tiny scrolls in his pocket. The scrolls would be a last-ditch effort before an enemy got into close proximity. Roland even explained a few tactics that he used when he was still a runic mana scribe. The biggest downside here was that Bernier would not enhance these runic scrolls and would not be able to activate them as much as Roland could. It would be best to use one of the camouflage spells and then just run, don't try to be a hero. Bernier rubbed his nose while Roland reminded him that this was only for protection. He feared that his assistant would try to defend this house to the bitter end. After getting beaten up by those adventurers, he felt like Bernier now had a chip on his shoulder, one that wouldn't go away unless he defeated someone in some kind of fight. You can try using the escape tunnel if there is no other choice. Through the month the two had dug into the workshop, expanding it in the process. Roland had also implemented an escape tunnel that would lead them out into a forest area behind the house. There was not enough time to finish it in time, so Bernier would need to either dig himself out or use an explosive scroll. There were also other defensive items and also a detection device that could be used to check for enemies. This was something that Bernier was already aware of, so there was no reason to double-check. "Boss, I've been meaning to ask you." "Yes." Roland looked at Bernier that was trying not to avoid that piercing gaze. Never mind, I'll ask you when you return. Be sure to come back in one piece, I can't run this workshop without you." Roland just nodded while also packing up some things. His suit of armor went through some modifications and he also scribed himself a nice batch of scrolls. "Now help me put on my armor, I leave tomorrow but need to get that meeting over with. Also see if you can get Agni into his, without him biting through the leather." He wasn't the only one that would be using runic equipment anymore. His Ruby Wolf companion had also been given some upgrades. It covered the general weak points like the neck, underbelly, and the chest area while leaving the legs unprotected. Agni needed them to still keep his speed advantage. This wolf armor was quite light and was made from a special metal that was lighter but less resistant than deep steel. Just like Roland's, it came in a darker red color and had some mana stones poking out. With the mystical monster trait, Agni was able to use more runic spells. Just like before, he was given a protective shield along with a boost to his speed. "I'll try, boss, but no promises." After dressing up in his work suit, Roland headed into the city. His destination being the Adventurers Guild. On the inside, he was greeted by the usual smell of unwashed men and cheap booze. The elven lady pointed him in the right direction, which was the meeting room of the scouting party that he would be a part of. "This is it." He looked at the piece of paper that he was given. This was proof that he was part of the expedition crew. There was also a side note which had the room number written on it. With this in mind, he straightened up and finally he knocked on the door. He was still not that comfortable with meeting new people, so he steeled his resolve. "Please come in, it's open." Roland was a bit early. He was someone that didn't like to make people wait for him. When there was an event he would always arrive at least 15 minutes early. Quite a few people were the opposite though, which sometimes resulted in him having to wait for a prolonged span of time. "Excuse me." He grabbed the handle and pushed the door open and discovered that there was only one person in this room. "Dark red armor? Are you perhaps a member of the Rising Sun Knight Order?" Inside he spotted an unfamiliar-looking woman. After the use of his identification skill, he could tell that just like him she was an adventurer at the Tier 2 rank that was close to the 100th level. She had a peculiar get-up that reminded Roland of what nuns in his old world used to wear. She had it all, the black veil and under it a white form-fitting coif. The tunic was a mix of white and yellow colors. Roland couldn't see it from this side, but on the back, there was a large drawing of the sun. A member from the Church of Solaria. It was clear that this person was part of the religious cult that roamed this land. This being the gathering place for the party meant that she was probably the healer. Her face was hard to make out as she was also wearing a dark veil, but she had one characteristic trait. Animal ears. A cat. He wasn't sure what type of beastman race she belonged to, but her ears were pushing that religious headpiece out. It produced the shape of large pointy animal ears that could belong to various beastman races. "Oh? Was I mistaken? I don't see the rising sun crest." Roland just entered and stood there for a moment as he analyzed the woman's stats. Thus it seemed like he was just spacing out. The woman on the other hand continued to speculate on his true identity. There were various knightly orders that worked for the Church of Solaria. He was not aware that they wore similar armors to him though. He had also switched to using a sun-like symbol for his wares, so this could have added to the confusion as well. "I'm not part of the church, I'm just an adventurer that was hired for this expedition." The woman was still talking, so he quickly answered in the hopes of ending the conversation early. "Oh my, is that so? Would you like some tea while we wait for the others?" He stepped forward while the woman was talking. From the way her voice sounded, he put her at an age above 20, but nothing too specific. Roland wanted to sit to the side and just wait, but then the offer came. The nun had brought out a full tea set and the kettle was even giving off steam. "Oh no, thank you." Roland wasn't one to socialize with others. Talking to them with anything more than business in mind felt like a chore. Also, due to nobles being involved in this new expedition, he decided to keep his helmet on. There was no way that he would risk being recognized by someone that knew his family. "Are you sure? This Allbrook honey is truly delicious with this black tea, you might regret it." "Why yes, I'm fine." After awkwardly walking to one of the chairs he finally sat down. This room looked similar to the one that he and Bernier had the hearing in. There were several tables with chairs at them with enough for most people to sit alone. It was time to wait. The nun realized that Roland wasn't willing to join her, so she didn't push it. Instead, she continued sipping some tea while humming a delicate tune. "Is this the place?" "Yeah, just go in." In time more people started to arrive, though it was surprising that the very next two people were someone that he knew. "Hey!" At first was a golden-haired girl with long ears that flinched back and almost fell over after noticing him sitting in the back. She was held in place by the person that was coming in after her. "What's wrong with you, Lobelia?" Roland couldn't see the person that was talking, but he recognized that voice. The person to whom that voice belonged pushed this half-elf forward and revealed himself to be Armand. What are those two doing here? It was hard not to notice them at this point. At first, Roland hoped that they might have walked into the wrong gathering room. Their actions didn't reflect this fact, as Armand just strutted in like he owned this place. Only after Lobelia indicated to where Roland was sitting with her head did his old opponent notice him. "What are you doing here? That's what I would like to know." Armand and Roland glared at each other, though due to his helmet being still on, this went unnoticed by the party of two. "Calm down, Armand." The half-elven girl started yanking on Armand's arm as she knew well that this wouldn't lead to anything good. "How can I calm down if this bastard is in here?" "Haha, he didn't mean it." Roland started feeling bad not for Armand but for the girl that was with him. He also recalled the woman with the glasses that probably needed to put up with this idiot's character. "Did you forget what Big Sis told you? Go and apologize." Lobelia delivered a swift kick to Armand's shin, but the man didn't seem convinced. Before a big scene could happen, a large green hand started pushing into Armand and another person walked in through the door. "Why you make noise?" This deep voice belonged to the half-orc that he had also seen on the day of the hearing. As Roland recalled, his name was Korgik and he did make quick work of that band of thugs. Soon the other party members started to arrive. It was time to start the strategic meeting and get ready for the lengthy expedition that would take a few weeks. Chapter 110 New Party. Roland was able to get a good seat in the back thanks to arriving early. Thanks to this he was able to examine everyone that would be taking part in this expedition. The first person was the nun that arrived earlier than he did. Then there was the duo of Armand and Lobelia that he had the pleasure of meeting again. It didn't seem that this martial artist had any goodwill towards him. This was understandable as not much time had passed since his firing. Then there were the members that he was less familiar with, like Korgik the half-orc. This warrior didn't talk much but seemed like he followed orders from people above him, like the guild master that was also here this very moment. He was talking with the man who would be the party leader of this expedition. This man seemed to have some kind of ranger class. He was wearing lighter armor that was covered by a dark green robe. He looked to be someone in his later 30s and was of the human race. He had a somewhat scruffy-looking beard that had some white patches here and there. That was actually it. With him the party consisted of only 6 people. Armand and the half-orc were the warriors of the party, while the half-elf and the team leader were probably the trackers and for monster detection. The nun was clearly the healer, but where they would place him remained to be seen. He had a wide array of runes that could be used from various ranges. People who looked from the outside might think that he was some kind of magic warrior with a wide range of skills, a jack-of-all-trades type. In reality, he was very much focused on his crafting and mana capacity to utilize his runes. "Okay, let us start this meeting." Roland heard the guild master speaking out while also glaring in Armand's direction. The young pugilist was sulking after getting a smack on the head by a giant fist. Luckily one hit was enough to silence the room, and now he and the party leader were discussing the plan. "I think everyone knows the basics of this mission. You all will be heading into the dungeon to babysit some noble brats." Armand was quick to recover as he and his half-elven friend chuckled at the words of the guild master. "Your main job will be to escort the nobles into the volcanic area below the 10th level of the labyrinth. Afterward, you will remain as lookouts. You will keep an eye out for any abnormalities, only get involved if their lives are in danger." There wasn't much new information. Just like he knew this was a test for the nobles and how they can take stressful situations. There would be one leader that needed to command the troops. They would need to clear out monsters while venturing into the deeper reaches of the dungeon. All of these nobles were fresh Tier 2 holders that would be mostly in their early 50s. Due to spending a lot of time at the noble academies, the noble youths lagged in terms of battle experience behind the common adventurers. They made it up with the levels of their skills and better classes that were planned out from the start. For instance, the knight class was locked away to people of noble descent. A person needed a hidden trait of noble birth to be able to procure it. A commoner would only be allowed to get lesser classes like shield warrior or spear warrior instead. The runesmith lord class could also have been triggered by Roland's noble roots. Abnormalities? Like a Tier 3 monster. He raised his hand and asked while some of the party members looked at him. "I see that you catch on fast, Wayland, was it?" "Let me answer that." Instead of the guild master, it was the team leader that spoke up. "But first let me introduce myself. My name is Silvio and I will be the leader of this party." Everyone nodded at the introduction as the man continued to speak. Yes, if a Tier 3 monster appears, we are tasked to stall it while the nobles evacuate, even at the cost of our lives. You serious? This time it was Armand that replied. He smacked his hand on the table that made it rattle around. Why should we risk our lives for some pompous nobles? Why else, for the money. The man grinned while looking at Armand. Everyone here would be getting paid an extravagant amount of money. Roland knew this after a big chunk of what he needed for that manufacturing knowledge would be paid for through this single mission. You have all signed the contracts, you know what will happen if you abandon the mission. Before this meeting even started, Roland was also called over to the guild during the recruitment drive. He needed to sign a document that would put him in a lot of trouble if he didn't prioritize the nobles. This was a serious mission that the guild couldn't afford to botch. If it's so important, why doesn't the guild send in more platinum adventurers? This time around it was Lobelia that posed this question. There are several reasons, but the most obvious one is that we don't just grow on trees. Silvio shrugged while shaking his head. The nobles also asked for adventurers that are only at the silver rank. Do you need me to explain this? He asked while indicating that it was something obvious. Roland knew what the reason was, but two certain party members still had question marks above their heads. It's the levels, they don't want to lose out on the experience. The team leader noticed this, so after giving out a sigh he just gave out the information. Due to how this leveling system worked, it was unfavorable to have high-tier people around when farming for experience. They still allowed a Tier 3 adventurer to come along just in case. If the adventurer party stayed far enough and didn't participate in the battles, the nobles would not suffer any debuffs to their experience. Well, not like it matters to me, as I see it, this is easy money. The older man grinned. It was clear that from his perspective the nobles were just throwing the money away. The dungeon had been mostly mapped out and there were no Tier 3 monsters around. If only Tier 2 monsters appeared, it would probably be a low-danger mission for this platinum rank adventurer. The only real uncomfortable part would be living down in a heated dungeon for so long. Roland was already prepared for that situation, but he had never field-tested his equipment for a prolonged time. This would be a good chance to gather some valuable data for his future creations. Him being on this expedition had a lot to do with the dungeon's climate. The guildmaster did hire him probably with this in mind, as he was the only person in this party that could use frost and cooling magic. This is also why when the question came up, he knew that he would need to do a little speech. That's all fine, but how do you expect us to last for weeks while surrounded by hot lava? Surprisingly, it was Armand that posed this question. Before answering, the party leader looked towards Roland and then quickly turned over to the guildmaster. The guildmaster assured me that one of the party members here would take care of that. If I'm not mistaken, it's the young man in the red armor. The people turned to him with surprised looks. They had seen him fight, but he still acted more as a warrior type that just used some magical items to get ahead of the competition. Yeah, little Wayland here will take care of that with one of his runic creations. Mind explaining? The guildmaster called out to Roland, who groaned inwardly. This would be the most uncomfortable part of the meeting, but he had come prepared. Yes. He nodded while standing up from his seat and walking over to where Silvio and the guildmaster were sitting. After arriving, he was given some space. He saw the other 4 party members looking at him. Feels like I'm back at school. Roland never liked the presentations that the school system forced on them. He was never able to get good grades then, as he was always stiff at presenting while a crowd of people looked at him. After giving out a small sigh, he took out a large piece of parchment. There was a board behind him to which he could place this parchment on. After using some tacks that he had Bernier make, he attached a diagram of some sort of tent on that wooden board. What's that, a tent? Won't that thing just burn up? Armand asked in a mocking tone, as if this was something that Roland didn't know. Yes, it's a tent, but it's a runic tent. It's made to resist the heat of the volcanic area. Roland tried to ignore Armand while pointing to the outside material that the tent was composed of. The design was more modern, as he took inspiration from regular camping tents. The roof part was slanted at an angle and was held up by a scaffolding made from hollow metal pipes. The tent leather that it's composed of is made from volcanic salamander leather. It is resistant to the heat, which will help insulate it. Won't we just be cooked inside? Armand asked a question again, but then flinched as he noticed the guildmaster looking at him. Roland really hoped that this guy wouldn't become a burden on the entire party, as everyone's lives depended on good cooperation. No, the air inside will be cooled and filtered, it will feel rather refreshing. This is not a regular tent, it has a runic structure in its scaffolding that will run on Elakian's fluid. We just need to bring enough to last us a month. I propose we take enough for 2 months to be on the safe side. Elakian's fluid. The half-orc called out from the front with confusion, as he clearly had no idea what Roland was talking about. People also call it mana fluid, just think of it as fuel for the magic. The mana fluid was named by its inventor. This fluid was similar to gasoline from his old world, as it was fuel for magic items. It was quite easy to handle, you just needed to place this fluid in a container and connect it to the desired magic item with the correct runic structure. It would then power it in a similar fashion as his wind turbines powered his entire workshop. This fluid came in 2 variants, one was natural and the other one was synthetic. It could be found in spots that were rich in mana or created by alchemists from mana stones. If the mana was rich enough, the fluid could even crystallize. It took on the shape of blue semi-transparent crystals that could be confused for mana stones. Roland also found this confusing, as the mana fluid was somehow a refined form of those mana stones, but it worked differently. He wasn't an alchemist, so he would probably never go down that path. Instead, he would need to improve on the generators he made. The best option seemed geothermal, as he was on a volcanic island. This mana fluid was a renewable source of energy, all thanks to the dungeons. It was one more reason why it was forbidden from destroying the dungeon cores. There were far too many resources at stake here. This fluid was the next best thing, as Roland had no portable generator. It did cross his mind to make one, as it would only require steam to generate mechanical force and would work similarly to his steam engine. The tent also possessed some supplementary runes and mana stones to lower the mana usage as much as the deep steel could handle. This tent design wasn't something that he had entirely come up with by himself, as some other craftsmen used similar products. He had been given the schematics by the guildmaster and he just updated it to fit his own vision. During the report, he also explained how they would be using these tents. They would have 2 of them and 2 people would be sleeping in each one, which would place the remaining outside as lookouts. Luckily for Roland, he would be exempt from this duty, as he was a special craftsman coming along. The ones keeping watch would be the 2 warriors and 2 scout types that were the team leader and Armin's half-elven friend. The cleric would also be exempt from this burden. Wayland here will also repair your equipment if it gets damaged. He was through with his presentation and finally returned to his seat. Finally, they switched to what everyone was tasked to do. He would need to, as mentioned, perform repairs and also keep the tents in working order. Armand and Korgak were the front-line fighters as expected. The nun from the Sun Church would remain in the middle of the formation as the only healer. He would stay behind her with Lobelia and would need to watch out for any sneak attacks. Then Silvio would be the frontman, guiding everyone into the dungeon. He was clearly here to keep the nobles safe. His class was tracking and detection related, which should keep the party safe from any unforeseen events. The biggest downside to his class was that it wasn't geared for combat that much. The man's main weapon was still a bow with a dagger as a sidearm. He was still a tier 3 class holder, so he remained the strongest person in this party. Well then, everyone knows Wayland and me now, how about the rest of you introduce yourselves? Korgak is Korgak, was what Korgak said almost instantly when the question was given. The others just nodded while everyone started introducing themselves. I'm Lobelia, the prettiest maiden in this city. The half-elven girl was the next one. She stuck out her chest proudly while striking some kind of strange uncomfortable pose that made Roland worry about her spine. I haven't heard of a maiden that can drink an old dwarf under the table, was what Armand said after the presentation. He was given a quick hit to the shoulder right afterward. He was also the next one in line to introduce himself. Similar to his companion, he struck a gallant pose with his chest out. "I am Armand, the man that will become a legend here." "PFFF legend," he says. Lobelia burst out in laughter right after her big brother made a fool of himself. Roland's face was covered, but he wanted to just facepalm at these two idiots shouting at each other. The last person was the nun, and probably the only one here besides the party leader that Roland was interested in. Praise the sun and the goddess Solaria. "I am Sister Kasia, I'll be sure to keep everyone alive through this journey. Would anyone like some tea?" The woman smiled while holding out a kettle with the tea in it. Everyone besides one person in the room declined. "Korgik wants." After a moment, Roland was looking at two huge green fingers holding a tiny teacup. The half-orc quickly downed the warm brew and even asked for a refill. "Okay, everyone, we will meet up at sunrise tomorrow morning. Get some sleep, as you might not be able to afterward." Everyone parted their ways and headed out to prepare for the next day. Roland went straight home to check up on the tents that he would be required to conserve. He used the rest of the day to check and then to recheck every piece of equipment that he was taking with him. Not everyone was like him. Korgik the half-orc headed straight to the pub to drink himself silly. Armand sneaked out into the pleasure district while Lobelia wasn't looking. Sister Kasia used this chance to speak the gospel inside of the Adventurers Guild. The church didn't have the chance to position themselves well in this city quite yet. So the people were now reminded of how annoying these zealots actually were. "Well, Agni, it's time to head out." "Woof. Bring back some souvenirs, boss." Roland chuckled a bit while parting with Bernier and his home. It was time to meet up with the new party of adventurers and see what kind of bratty nobles he would need to babysit. His armor had been polished and looked pristine, he was only missing a nice flowing cape to make him look like a knight lord. "Okay, let's get this over with," he mumbled to himself as he approached the city, the red sun rays hitting his armor as the sun rose on the horizon.